Hello friends, welcome to Universe of Naruto X. If you love Naruto what if stories and anime explanations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin today's story. A sudden, uncomfortable silence took hold of the living room as the front door of Suna's home opened. Though a bit of light conversation had managed to drum itself up between Naruto and Satsuki, who were currently the only occupants of the room, it all vanished upon the arrival of the remainder of their team. However, it was not the added presence of Shikamaru and Kakashi that had sent the pair into silence. No, it was what Shikamaru held in his arms that killed any semblance of normality. Though Zabuza had indeed confirmed that the huntress was still alive despite the absolute torrent of damage Naruto had inflicted upon the girl, neither he nor Satsuki had expected to ever see her again. Contrary to these reasonable expectations, the huntress was cradled in Shikamaru's arms. She was certainly badly injured, as evidenced by the litany of cuts and bruises on her face, but she was still breathing rhythmically. Start talking. This better be good, Naru said rigidly as he glared at the unconscious girl. Kakashi nodded and directed Shikamaru to sit down in a nearby chair, which resulted in the Nar having to awkwardly balance the huntress on top of himself. I'll give you the official reason that she's here, and then I'll let you all argue until your hearts give out. Getting that first part out of the way, we're technically obligated to either kill any rogue ninja we encounter or capture them. I usually ignore that rule because it's a pain in the butt, but that's the legal reason the girl is here right now, he said. He then looked to Shikamaru and drummed his fingers on the arm of the chair he had chosen to sit down in. As for what's actually going on, Shikamaru broke one of the prime rules of this line of work, which is to always keep yourself impartial to the people you meet. In other words, never let your personal feelings interfere with the task at hand. He said. At this, Naruto rose to his feet and stared down at Shikamaru from across the room. Let me get this straight. You got all sentimental about a person who just about murdered a member of your own team. Please tell me I've got this wrong somehow, he questioned. The Nar pensively met his eyes and gathered himself for a few moments. I really wish you were wrong. I feel about as dumb as I look, he said honestly. The blonde's nostrils flared at the response. It was a direct confirmation of his accusations, and that fact angered Naruto greatly. Does what she did literally today not bother you at all? He said tensely. Shikamaru shifted in place and wiped some stress-born sweat from his brow. It bothers me a ton. It wasn't an easy choice, he said. Nar shook his head and rubbed his temples. He was extremely tired from the events on the bridge, and such intense emotion was quite fatiguing. It should have been an easy choice. Even if you just found her by accident, which you definitely didn't, you should have just left her there to freeze. She deserves it after what she's done, he said angrily. Finally, Shikamaru showed some backbone. Satsuki isn't dead, Nar. She definitely tried to kill her, and I'm not okay with that. But don't you think what you did to her was punishment enough? She's barely alive, he argued a bit more firmly. Nar clenched his jaw and stepped forward. Why are you defending her? No, screw that. Why have you been defending her? We had this same argument back on the bridge. What's your problem? Why are you so against the idea of her dying? He asked harshly. Shikamaru took a moment to set the huntress on the floor without damaging her further. He then stood up to meet his teammate. Because I don't think answering every wrong a person commits with murder is a good way to go about things. It doesn't do anybody any good. Let's say Satsuki had died. Would killing Haku have really made you feel any better? He shot back. Nar barked a short laugh. That's adorable. You even know her name. Want me to make wedding cards? He said sarcastically. Shikamaru held his glare. Answer the question. How do you feel? Even when you thought both of them were dead, can you honestly say that you felt any better? Because you still looked pretty damn heartbroken to me, he pressed tenaciously. Naruto's eye twitched. While he certainly had stronger ground to stand on, Shikamaru was a daunting person to clash with intellectually. That much was clear. Nothing could have made me feel better. Not even killing her. That doesn't change that she deserved it, he said. Seriously. Shikamaru jammed a finger at Satsuki, who was sitting silently on the couch behind Naruto. For the second time, Satsuki isn't dead. If she were, I'd be way more willing to agree with you on this one thing. But she's still alive, so I really can't agree with the notion that she deserves to be dead, he said. Nar scoffed at his words. Yeah, and do you really think that she hasn't killed other people? Because I'd be surprised if she hasn't slaughtered at least a few dozen, he countered. The Nar held his ground despite the second step the blonde had taken toward him. What gives you the right to be the judge? You didn't know those people, and you never will. She isn't innocent. I'm not even going to try to argue that. I just don't think it's right for any of us to sentence her to something. Leave that up to the people who do it for a living, he said. Nar prepared himself to speak once again, but was cut off by an unexpected voice. If you feel so strongly about it, then come and make it happen. I won't stop you. Every person in the room turned their attention to the floor where Haku resided. She was now sitting up with one hand supporting her weight and the other rubbing her bruised cheek. Slowly, surprisingly, the battered huntress staggered to her feet while using the chair right next to her for support. How much have you heard? Shikamaru asked carefully as Haku steadied herself and wiped dry dirt from her face. Enough. I know what this is about, she said shortly. She then locked eyes with Nar, who was visibly perturbed by her return to consciousness. After a moment of incredibly uneasy silence, Haku spoke again. You aren't exactly wrong about me having killed before. I mean, I've killed plenty. You will, too, in time. But for now, you can still take the high road if it satisfies your morals, she said. Nar glanced at the coffee table at the end of the couch where Akana sat. Don't tempt me, he growled. Haku shrugged and stood waiting for his next move. The blonde slowly found himself feeling more and more uncomfortable with the idea of flatly killing the girl. Though his anger toward her had not waned, his belligerent rage had. He was fully aware and in control of himself for the most part, and that fact seemed to be suppressing his desire to kill. When his silence stretched on for too long, Satsuki cleared her throat. Since I'm the one who ended up in purgatory for a few minutes, I think I've got the right to say my piece now, she said, somewhat relieved to have been effectively pulled from the platform. Naruto conceded and nodded. With her status as the next speaker established, Satsuki continued with her eyes fixed on Haku. I don't think it'll be any surprise to you that I'm not exactly a fan of you or the fact that my own teammate went out of his way to save your life, but unlike this Hoded, I also don't think that you're really all that much worse than the average ninja. This is a violent business. Murder is a necessity, she began. She then sat up a bit straighter and cracked her stiff neck. Like you said, we'll probably all end up with a long list of graves to our credit. We're just green enough to not be hypocrites when we look at you and cringe. I don't like that you're here, and I'll give Shikamaru a piece of my mind when I have the time and energy. But for now, I won't bother you. Just stay the hell away from me, she concluded. Naruto initially opened his mouth to refute the sentiment, but quickly shut it again. I still hate every part of this, he eventually said. Shikamaru took an uncomfortable glance at Haku, who had seated herself back on the floor. I'd be lying if I said that I liked it either, but I'm not backing down on this. She doesn't deserve to die, he said firmly, opting to step in before another argument could brew. Kakashi stood up from his seat. Well, let's leave it at that, then. I'd say that Satsuki's take on things is the most reasonable. For now, let's turn in for the night. I think we could all use the sleep, he said while suppressing a yawn. It was still fairly early in the evening, but every single ninja in the room, Haku included, was utterly exhausted. For the first and only time that day, they all agreed on something. Haku blew a strand of hair out of her face as she stared up at the ceiling of the unfamiliar room. Her emotions regarding her present situation were mixed at best and purely negative at worst. Life with Zabuza hadn't exactly been pleasant, but it had at least been straightforward. Now, all that lay before her was a sea of uncertainty and doubt. Would she be executed by Konoha upon her delivery to its justice system? Would she be set free? Many questions, virtually no answers. Sighing slightly, she glanced across the room into the leftmost corner. In it sat the singular positive of her current reality. Shikamaru had said very little since the lengthy argument he had had with Naruto earlier in the evening, and for good reason. It was clear that his decision had created something of a temporary rift between himself and his teammates. He had plenty to think about, and likely just as much to regret. Though her initial instinct was to feel guilty on his behalf, logic dictated that it was his own fault. I never asked you to save me, boy. I'm not sure why you did in the first place, she thought to herself as she gazed at him. Despite her puzzlement at his decision-making, Haku still found herself unable to hold anything against him. He had shown her the ultimate mercy to no benefit of his own, even after having witnessed her attack his team. Finding that she could take the silence no longer, Haku spoke up. Are you planning on sleeping at all, or is that not possible tonight? She asked. The Nar glanced up from the floor and shrugged tiredly. Maybe, maybe not. I might just pass out by accident, he said. Honestly, the huntress nodded and rubbed one of her eyes. She had been allowed a bath by the wife of the bridge builder whom she had been tasked to kill, which had made for an interesting, if quite brief, encounter with the woman. The bath had been refreshing, though quite uncomfortable at points due to her soreness. I know that you said you weren't sure before, but why? Why did you bother? She asked after a time. Shikamaru sighed and let one of his legs extend out in front of him as he stared at the far wall. You played me. You made me care. Only took you a few days, too. Even if it was all to get information out of me or even to set this situation up somehow. I can't help but be sort of impressed. You're damn good, he said numbly. He was ashamed of having fallen prey to his own emotions, and he was attempting to hide it behind a veil of apathy. Haku felt her chest tighten slightly at his words. I didn't want to lie to you. I really didn't. I just had to. There was no way around it, she said carefully. The genin in the corner met her eyes for a moment. Is Haku actually your name? He asked oddly. For whatever reason, despite the simplicity of the question, Haku's bottom lip quivered in response. He truly had no faith in any of what she had told him. All the way down to the most personal of details. Yes, it is, Hakuyuki, she said britly. Noticing the break in her voice, Shikamaru looked at her more carefully and scooted away from the wall a few feet. Are you okay? He asked quietly. The huntress covered her eyes with her left hand and let out a sad laugh that slowly decayed into a bitter chuckle. I knew that I would have to kill you. I knew I would have to hurt you all, and I still kept coming. Now, the person I made so many mistakes for doesn't even trust me enough to believe in my name, she said shakily. She then shook her head as a tear escaped down the side of her face and down onto her futon. And then you went and wrecked their trust in you by still caring about me when you shouldn't have. Maybe I'm being dramatic, but I feel like a parasite, she said in what more or less amounted to a whimper. Shikamaru slowly scooted his way to her side and settled beside her. You aren't a parasite. I saved you because I saw a good person behind the lies. You aren't the monster Nar thinks you are. And even if it's going to make my life difficult, I'm glad you're alive, he said reassuringly. Haku slowly let her hand slide down her face and onto the floor again. You're too pure for your own good. That innocence will get you killed someday, she said. The Nara smiled and scratched the back of his head. It's probably a good message for me to hear. It's a lesson worth learning. But even if you end up being right, I'd rather die knowing that I saved a life before I kicked the bucket, he said honestly. Haku gazed at him for a few moments before sitting up and drawing her knees to her chin. It's such a cruel thing that people like you or even Naruto are forced to become ninja. I did it out of necessity, but from what I've seen, who your family is determines your career path in the hidden villages. You deserve more peace than this path will ever afford you, she said. Shikamaru shrugged his shoulders once again. Nothing I can do about it, so I don't complain all that much, even if I think most of what we do is a serious drag. Besides, I can't say it's been all bad. Traveling has been weirdly fun, he said. Haku settled into a cross-legged position. I hope that enthusiasm carries you as far as it possibly can. I'd hate to see you become as cynical as I am, she said. The Nar raised an eyebrow and cracked a smile. You were full of jokes out in the forest. I don't think you're all the way gone yet, he said. Haku thought back to the night fondly and sighed. She then worked her way forward little by little. That was the first time I'd laughed like that in years. The only other time was by myself, too. Left on my own. I'm completely inert these days. I can think, I can eat, I can survive, but I can't laugh anymore. You brought that back out of me again. That meant a lot to me, she said quietly. Shikamaru itched his cheek absently. Everybody deserves to laugh. I'm not a comedian at all. That's Naruto's job, but I'm glad you got to laugh a little. Sounds to me like you've earned it, he said. Finally unable to stop herself, Haku lurched forward and wrapped him up in a tight hug. I haven't earned a damn thing, and I think you're a fool for caring, but thank you for saving my life. You reminded me what it felt like to enjoy myself. You're a lovely person, Shikamaru, she whispered in his ear. The Nar blinked several times at the affectionate honorific she had attached to his name. And no problem. I think you're exaggerating a little, but still, he said awkwardly. Haku separated from him, but kept her hands gently resting on his shoulders. I'm not, but it's clear that you don't take compliments. Well, I'll leave it at that for now, she said with a smile. She then lowered herself back onto her futon and closed her eyes. Sleep. We both need it, she said. The Nar nodded and stood up to leave. He hadn't made it 3 steps before he stopped and returned to his corner. The huntress, having tracked his movements by ear, opened her eyes once again. Feeling bold. Are we? She said sarcastically. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and settled back into place across the room. Nope. Nothing like that. I just think it'd be better if I'm in here just for tonight. I don't think he'd try anything, but Naruto's in a bad mood and he doesn't like you very much. I won't do anything weird. Don't worry, he said matter-of-factly. Haku felt a small part of herself melt at the implication of his words. Pulling her covers up so only her nose and eyes poked out from under them. She curled up into a ball beneath the blankets. Even if I'm executed, I'm glad to have met you, Shikamaru. Nara. Nar exhaled through his nose absently as he completed scratching a small geometric design into the floor of his room with a canny. The shapes were meaningless, but they provided an easy distraction from the dull silence. He was hardly happy to begin with, which made his present inability to sleep all the more irritating. He wanted the day to be over in the worst way, and that luxury wasn't being afforded to him for whatever reason. As he blankly began to scratch another set of shapes into the floor, the sliding door to his room creaked open. Can I come in for a few minutes? Satsuki, whose head was poking in through the small opening she had created, asked quietly. Finding that he had nothing better to do with his time, Naruto nodded and observed her curiously as she gingerly stumbled her way into the room. She was still more or less incapable of walking long distances. But as it turned out, most of the reason was that the vegetative state Haku had rendered her to had muddled her circulation. As it returned, so did her mobility. So what's on your mind? Naruto asked once she was inside and settled. The raven-haired girl tucked a strand of hair behind her left ear and made a wide gesture with her hands. A lot of things, a lot happened today. We completed our first mission. I pretty much died and then Shikamaru brings my murderer home for whatever reason. A lot to process, she said. Honestly, Naruto prickled at the reminder of the situation regarding Shikamaru and Haku. That last part is probably why I can't sleep. I just don't get it. What good reason could he have had to do it? He said frustratedly. Satsuki shrugged and claimed Naruto's unused blanket for herself by wrapping it around her own shoulders. I'm not him, so I can't say for sure, but we do know that they had met a few times before the bridge. Way out here, it's possible they made fast friends, she suggested. A humorous smirk then spread across her lips. Or maybe he's just a sucker for a pretty face. Because that girl is gorgeous. I'd kill to have her skin, she said only half-jokingly. Nar snorted and leaned his face on the ridge of his hand. He better not be. I'll beat some sense into him if that has anything to do with it, he muttered. Satsuki waved a dismissive hand and further wrapped the blanket she had taken around herself. I doubt it's the case, but that's neither here nor there. My guess is that they got to know one another just well enough for him to get attached. She was definitely lying to him for most of it, but even a liar can let their personalities slip through sometimes. Somebody as smart as him would probably pick up on that, she said. The blonde picked at some leftover dried blood on his forehead that even the bath hadn't washed away. I guess that makes some sense. It's still dumb that he saved her. Even if you're still here, she tried to kill you. That's not okay, he said. His teammate shook her head. She was actually trying to kill you in the moment, but I took it instead. Your point still stands, though. It was stupid of him to do, but even so, the circumstances feel so specific that I doubt it'll be any sort of issue with him going forward, she said. Nar raised an eyebrow and studied the girl. You're way more fine with all of this than you should be, you know, he said. Satsuki shifted in place to alleviate the pressure on her left leg. I'm not fine with it. I just don't see the point in letting it ruin me right now. Besides, people have done way worse things than get emotionally involved in a mission. It happens more than they probably tell us. He made a mistake, a big one. He'll be punished for it, but I don't think that's our place, she said. The blonde considered her logic briefly. Yeah, you're probably right. I'm still pissed at him and I'm not going to let him forget just how dumb this was, but it'll probably happen to all of us at some point, he admitted. The pair then lapsed into a fairly lengthy silence with no words being exchanged for an upwards of 3 minutes. Can I ask you a question, Nar? Satsuki inquired to break the streak. Nar glanced back up at her from the floor and nodded tiredly. Sure, knock yourself out, he said. The raven-haired girl pursed her lips and narrowed her eyes. She was grappling with something that much was clear. When I woke up on the bridge, I saw you at the edge. You had red eyes, your nails were long, and you had fangs. I'm guessing that changes how you beat up Haku, but I'm totally lost other than that. What happened to you after I dropped out? She asked carefully. The blonde instantaneously tensed and balled up on himself. His posture shrunk inwards, his eyes averted away from her, and his arms tightly hugged his knees to his chest. Quickly, sensing his discomfort, Satsuki scooted a foot closer to him. I feel like for pushing you on this since it clearly bugs you, but I feel like I have a right to know. You had nothing for her when I took the needles for you, and the next thing I knew, you'd beat her senseless, she said gently as Naruto clammed up. It took him several moments, but the blonde eventually spoke. I really don't want to tell you. It's not something that you really want to know. Trust me, he said. Satsuki tilted her head to one side. I want to know. If you're worried about me thinking less of you for whatever that power was, I'll probably be more concerned if you don't tell me, she said. Nar kept his eyes glued to the floor. He had greatly feared being questioned on his explosive reaction to Haku's attempted murder of Satsuki, and now it had come. Worst of all, it was coming from the last person he wanted to explain it all to. Despite his dislike of the situation, the genin forced himself to speak. What happened on October 10, 16 years back? He asked vaguely. Satsuki furrowed her brow in puzzlement at the seemingly random question, but answered it anyway. The nine-tailed fox attacked Konoha. We lost a few thousand people, and then the fourth put the fox down. He died in the process, she summarized. Naruto sighed and shook his head. You're mostly right, but one big part of that is wrong. The fox never died. The fourth was strong from what I've heard, but he couldn't take it down. He solved it another way, he said. He then took a deep breath and steeled himself. Outside of Kakashi already being well aware of his status, he had never verbally told another human being of what he harbored. He found an infant and he sealed the demon away inside it. He died doing it, he said. Satsuki's eyes widened just a tad as she connected the dots being provided to her. And that baby was, she began, trailing off near the end as the magnitude of what she was learning truly sunk in. Nar nodded stiffly and finally looked her in the eyes. You're looking at him. I've got a demon inside me. That's what happened when Haku killed you. I got so angry that whatever weird sealing jutsu the fourth put on my body slipped a little. It's never happened to me before, but I know what the fox feels like, he said. The Uchiha girl simply stared at him silently for a time. It was an enormous chunk of information to process, and it was clear that she needed time. Finally, after nearly 2 minutes, Satsuki moved. When she did, Naruto flinched and scuttled back a foot. At this sight, Satsuki frowned. Did you think I was going to hit you? She asked, drawing an ashamed nod from her teammate. The girl responded by obliging to his silent wish and giving him space. Part of me is shocked to hear all of this, but at the same time, it definitely explains what happened today, and it also explains why our classmates treated you like garbage, she said thoughtfully. Nar smiled sadly. Yep, they've got every right to hate my guts, he said depressingly. His gaze then fell to his own lap. He utterly despised feeling so exposed and alien. Then, against all his expectations, something surprising happened. Hey, look at me, Satsuki said softly. Before he could respond, the raven-haired girl gently laid her hands on either side of his face and turned his head upward. Once they were eye level again, she let her hands slide down to his arms where they stayed. If you were worth hating or anywhere near as bad as you clearly think you are, I wouldn't even bother making fun of you, and I definitely wouldn't joke with you as much as I do. You're a demon's container, not the demon itself. Don't get that confused, she said firmly. Nar tried to respond, but found that he had no clue what to say. As such, Satsuki continued on for him. Using her grip on his arms, she pulled him forward and wrapped him up in an uncharacteristically warm hug. I'm not going to treat you any better or worse just because of what you keep under wraps. I'll treat you just the same. I'll make fun of you. I'll give you grief. And I'll get prickly when you fire back. Nothing is going to change, she said. Despite none of her words being precisely positive in a literal sense, their true meaning hit Naruto like a massive stone. And even if it's a little weird to think that you woke up a demon to defend me, it's still really touching that the idea of me dying pushed you so far over the edge. That was really sweet of you in a violent sort of way, Satsuki said, a trace of humor working its way into her voice by the end. She then made more space between them and smiled. And hey, I got to awaken my sharing today, so I can't be too mad about how things turned out. Just keep your head up, okay? She said. Naruto nodded, but said nothing. Sensing that his voice was entirely gone, Satsuki released him from her grip and flicked him on the forehead. I'm going to head to bed. If you want to murder Haku or something, she's probably asleep by now, she joked. A moment later, she exited the room with a still awkward walk. Once she was gone, Nar collapsed onto his back. That went way better than it could have, he thought to himself. Satsuki's reaction had been entirely unexpected, full and unwavering acceptance. It felt out of place given how volatile she was 70% of the time, but he had no room to complain. Why are girls so confusing? He grumbled. He then reached out for the covers he had been using for warmth. After a few seconds of searching, he came up empty-handed. She stole my blanket. Hai's eyes dragged up from his desk as the sound of his office door opening caught his attention. 3 days had passed since the return of Team 7 from their assignment in the Land of Waves. And to say that the process of parsing out what needed to be done had been a headache would have been a massive understatement. In fact, the meeting set to begin in mere moments would be the first regarding the mission itself. The elderly leader had required time to ponder his options. Now standing just inside the office with a guard at her side was the primary subject of controversy. Apparently named Hakuyuki, the girl had fought on the side of Zabuza Mamochi, a deadly and sought-after rogue from the Hidden Mist. She had reportedly brought Satsuki to the edges of death, and was only brought down by what heroine could only assume was the first recorded occurrence of Naruto's seal well and truly weakening. These truths were not what made her such a complicated problem to solve. No, that honor fell at the feet of Shikamaru Nar, who would be having his own meeting with the Hokage directly after Haku's hearing concluded. For reasons Hiruzen could not specifically discern, Shikamaru had gone out of his way to save the girl from freezing to death in a river after she had been savagely beaten and tossed aside by Nar. A direct violation of protocol, and a confusing one at that. Leave us, Heen said with a sideways glance to the guard. The man nodded and stepped back out of the office, closing the door behind him. Haku's wrists were bound at her waist, and the plain tunic she had been afforded in her brief confinement was fitted with a seal that would paralyze her should she attempt to utilize enjutsu of any kind. It appeared that she had hardly slept in the past several days. Take a seat. We have much to discuss, the old man said with a curt nod. Doing as she was told, Haku sat herself down in the chair opposite hers and across the desktop. Once they were both settled, Hiruzen cleared his throat and rested his elbows on the wood in front of him. When I first heard of your involvement in the near murder of one of my own genin, I was perfectly ready to simply lock you up and let international authority deal with you. I figured this would be a simple matter, but as it turns out, it has been anything but. He began. Taking a moment to study the girl's reaction, he found that she was still completely stone-faced. What about this is anything but straightforward. I attacked and maimed her. Under orders, yes, but that doesn't change a thing. Haku replied flatly. The Hokage shook his head and maintained eye contact with her. You're in an odd legal position. The reason I took so much time to finally speak with you is because I needed to clarify a few things about you. First and foremost, from what you told Kakashi during the brief interrogation he subjected you to on the journey back from the Wave Country, you've never been aligned with a village. I didn't quite buy that until I did some digging into your surname, he said, taking a deep breath between thoughts to continue what was bound to be a lengthy explanation. Based on what little I was able to find on the Yuki clan, you lived in a small hamlet in the Land of Water, well outside the jurisdiction of a major village. You were never a producer of ninja, though you did possess a keek jank, he said. Before he could continue, Haku cut him off with a bitter laugh. Spare me the history lesson. I know all too well. We were slaughtered for our bloodline. Civil war is a cruel thing. We had nothing to do with it, and yet they saw fit to kill us all. She spat, unfazed by her sudden outburst. His expression and posture remained unchanged. As such, that leaves you as the last member of your family currently living. It also puts you in an odd place in terms of what I can and can't do to you. You technically aren't a rogue since you never held any allegiances to begin with, but you're certainly a criminal. It would be a serious headache to try to get you executed given just how much of your criminal record is impossible to confirm for sure, he said, drawing a puzzled look from Haku. I knew of Zabuza Mochi and his endeavors. Every hidden village did. You, on the other hand, are a very new development. In no report of Zabuza's hits and underhanded dealings was a young girl dressed as a huntress mentioned. Not in the catalog I have access to. Anyway, I'm sure you had a hand in many of those scenarios, but with no evidence to concretely prove it, the worst I can do is indict you for attempted murder. His continued, Haku wiggled her wrists in her shackles and shifted in place. I'm assuming you're going to imprison me but not kill me. She inquired. Hai folded his hands on the desk and eyed her intently. Given your precarious status as an unknown commodity, I find it difficult to justify wasting the due's time by calling for international law to be enacted against you. As such, your fate falls to me. Imprisonment is certainly one option, but a man in my position has the ability to bend the rules a bit, he said vaguely. The girl frowned, though her eyes held intrigue. Go on, she said. The elderly leader then straightened his posture and considered just how wise it was to propose what he had in mind. It was certainly less than conventional and could be political suicide, but logic existed at the idea's core. According to Kakashi's report, you were a complete impossibility for Satsuki to contend with. There was also a side note that claimed Zabuza declared you to be a threat to even him in battle. Given just how much brute force Naruto had to exert to put you down, I would say that there's a grain of truth to these statements. Combine that with you possessing what is likely a completely unique Kekjenk, and I think there's some reason to explore other choices, he said. Finally resolving himself to go through with the thing he had been considering, Hisan folded his arms across his chest. Zabuza was more than just a hitman for hire. He also carried out black market espionage. Iwagakure was caught employing his services nearly a decade ago. Only a fool would come to the conclusion that Iwa was his only client. Given that you've allegedly been his companion since you were a child, I'm assuming that you've accompanied him on similar missions before, he said. Haku pursed her lips. Maybe I have, she said. The Hokage nodded and leaned forward across the desk with his chin resting on his interlaced fingers. I'm going to extend you an offer that I probably shouldn't make. I want you to write me a detailed summary of any and all information you have acquired over the years that would be useful to a sitting kage. You strike me as observant, so I'm going to trust your judgment, he said. The girl absently tapped her foot on the floor. What would I gain from doing such a thing? She asked pointedly. He leaned back in his chair once again. A chance at freedom. Your case will likely net you anywhere from 10 years to a life sentence. Closer to the latter, I'd say if you do as I say, however, I'll give you an opportunity to make your first allegiance. Write that summary and I'll assign you to Konoha's Anbu Black Ops unit, he revealed. Haku stared at him silently for a number of moments. This feels extremely illegal, she pointed out. Hai shrugged his shoulders and rummaged around in his desk drawer briefly. He then produced a mask with markings designating its appearance as a type of hawk. You have quite a bit to learn about how this world operates. My young prisoner laws are mere suggestions at the highest levels of government. I have to follow them publicly and I tend to follow them in private. But in situations like this, I can't quite swallow the notion of wasting what could be such a golden opportunity. Now, you may still refuse my offer, but if you do, know that you won't get another like it, he said, setting the mask down on the desk as he spoke. Tell me a bit about what this deal would mean for me. Haku pressed calmly. Hizen drummed his fingers on the wooden surface. You would still effectively be a captive, at least for a fair stretch of time. You would live in the Anbu barracks, subsist on handouts provided to you by the Corps, and carry out assignments under harsh, meticulous scrutiny. Any signs of foul play on your part would land you right in a jail cell. No trial, no discussion, he said bluntly. Haku raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound much like a chance at freedom to me, she shot back. Here is in place a hand atop the mask. Prove yourself to be unprotic and loyal, and you'll slowly be granted your freedom. I'll even pay you a wage if you behave well enough for long enough. In other words, patience is your friend, he clarified. For a time, the girl said nothing. She had much to process, much to consider. Eventually, she reached forward and took hold of the mask. Fine, I'll agree to this. Just don't expect anything groundbreaking from my summary. I know small things and maybe a few fairly important things, but nothing mind-blowing, she said. Hai responded by pulling the mask back into his own grasp. Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. You won't be getting this until that summary is written. You have 48 hours. A typewriter will be provided to you in your temporary holding cell, he said. The girl sighed and nodded. She then rose to her feet, sensing that the conversation was largely over, escort her back to her confinement. The Hokage called out to the guard he knew to be just outside the office. The door promptly opened to reveal the same burly man. Haku took a step toward the guard to return to her cell, but stopped. She then glanced back over her shoulder. What will become of Shikamaru Nara Hokage-sama? She asked, noting her adoption of his proper title. Hai studied her for a moment. Haku's tone had softened significantly upon saying the genin's name. Hell be punished. He's set to speak with me in just a few minutes. Actually, he replied. The girl turned her eyes back toward the corridor beyond the office. Will I be able to see him? She asked quietly. The Hokage shook his head and returned the Anbu mask to his desk drawer. Not anytime soon. In the future possibly, but that all depends on your behavior and how he goes about his next few assignments, he said. Hakan nodded dejectedly and stepped out into the hallway. The guard then closed the door to the Hogue's office. Once he was alone again, Hisan glanced up at the clock. 15 minutes remained until Shikamaru was scheduled to arrive. He had intentionally placed the two meetings directly after one another for the sake of observation. Sighing slightly, Hazen wiped sweat from his wrinkled brow. The ignorance of youth, inevitable and tiring, Shikamaru exhaled through his nose and turned the handle to the door before him. He had put himself in the position he was presently in, but that in no way meant he was looking forward to the conversation he was about to have. With one last push, Shikamaru entered the office of Hiruzen Surbi, the Hokage. As expected, the man himself sat behind his desk with a look of expectant calm on his face. He looked quite weathered, and the nar could sense that his mood was far from pleasant. I'd like to make this brief, so please sit down. I don't have the energy to waste time, the old man said sternly. Shikamaru followed the order and took a seat across from his superior. There was little left to do other than brace himself for the verbal shellacking he was bound to receive. You know exactly why you're here, so I'm not going to bother explaining it to you. Instead, I'm going to tell you exactly what could have happened had you not been exceptionally lucky. Hai began. Shikamaru nodded and kept his eyes glued to his own lap. Look me in the eyes, boy. The Hokage sternly commanded. Though he initially hesitated, the Nar did as he was told and met the firm stare of Hiruzen. With eye contact established, the old man began his oration. Did you not once stop to think to yourself that a complete stranger being so openly social is cause for suspicion, especially given the timing? Hai questioned. Shikamaru nodded dejectedly. Yeah, I did actually. I was suspicious of her right away. He said, rubbed his temples and shook his head. Then why on earth did you in chronological order say nothing to your direct superior? Apparently spend 3 days messing about with her in the forest. Argue against Naruto ending her life immediately after Satsuki, your own teammate, had been critically injured and then finally pull her from a freezing river. No matter what way I look at it, I can't make sense of your logic, he asked in a dumbfounded tone. The Nar clenched his jaw and held his tongue. He was undoubtedly on the losing end of the reasoning. After all, he was not there to argue. He was there to accept. I just didn't think she deserved to die. Not like that. Maybe I was stupid to spend any time with her at all, but she's not a bad person, he said. Hai sighed heavily. There are a few things wrong with that. First and foremost, it really should have been more prevalent in your mind that she was merely using you for information. Second, you had no way to know that Satsuki was still alive after she was struck down. Did her supposed death not anger you? He asked. Shikamaru's expression soon took on a new theme. One of repressed agitation. Do you want me to be honest? He said, eliciting a curt nod from his superior. After mentally preparing himself for the backlash he was bound to receive for what he was about to say, the Nar spoke. I'm not exactly attached to either one of them. They spend most of their time at each other's throats whining about one another or something like it. They're off in their own little world, and I do my own thing because I don't have much of a choice. Not even Nar is super friendly most of the time, he said bluntly. The Hokage seemed to consider the statement for a moment. In that case, you had better work on your social skills because reassignment isn't an option. They're both decent people, but both have had a nightmarish early start in life. That's something you can't exactly claim. Give them time and I think you'll come to like them, he responded. He then shifted in his seat. That aside, I'm still more than a bit disappointed that your emotions weren't ones of grief when your own comrade fell. You aren't a sociopath. That much, I'm sure of, but some empathy would do you good, he added. Shikamaru's hands balled into fists in his lap as he recalled the awful day on the bridge. It's not as simple as you want it to be. I wasn't numb to Satsuki just about dying. It freaked me out and it hurt. Even if she doesn't mean a ton to me personally, she gave herself up to protect Nar. I wasn't as heartbroken as Nar, but I was in pain. When Nar broke Haku's mask, I just felt so stupid. I'd known it was her in the back of my mind, but seeing it really laid out was horrible, he said. He then released the breath he had been forcibly holding and relaxed. I deserve any kind of punishment you want to send my way, but at least keep in mind that I didn't try to stop him from killing her. I just told him that I thought it would be wrong, he said as an addendum. His gave no discernible reaction. You were a fool to think he would listen to you, and I'm glad you felt like a simpleton because you became a complete and utter slave to your emotions. If Hakuyuki were even a touch more cold-hearted and cynical than she already seems to be, she'd have carved you up and left your body to rot long before you fought on the bridge, he said. An odd chuckle then escaped the elderly leader. In a way, your childish sentimentality may have saved your life. I spoke with that girl less than 20 minutes ago, and she certainly doesn't strike me as particularly gentle. Her near killing of both your teammates backs that notion up quite nicely, I'd say. Whether or not you think she's a good person, she certainly has no qualms about ending lives when she must, he said almost more to himself than Shikamaru. Perhaps you were able to touch her just enough to find yourself in her good graces. She certainly could have killed you. It matters little, though. Your actions in the land of waves were more or less indefensible, he concluded. The Nar pursed his lips and nodded. I'm going back to the academy, aren't I? He asked quietly. Much to his surprise, Hisan shook his head in refutation of the idea. In most cases, you'd be right. But I'm going to spare you from that fate based on one single detail of the mission and your actions therein. While you did save Haku from near certain death, you did not interfere with Naruto's attempt to end her life in the line of duty. I'm going to do you a favor and interpret that fact as proof that your loyalties still remained with your team at the end of the day. He corrected. Shikamaru felt himself relax ever so slightly. All right, then tell me what's going to happen. I want to get this all over with. He pressed. The Hokage took a deep breath and straightened his posture so as to reassume his authority. I'm putting you on probation in a way. From here on out, until I see sufficient evidence to suggest that you've matured enough to be trusted, left to your own devices, Kakashi will be writing detailed reports of your actions on each and every mission your team partakes in. I'll also be slashing your paycheck in half for the next year, he explained. Shikamaru internally winced at the decrease in pay, but shelled his disappointment. Should the reports submitted to me reveal continued issues, you will be disciplined accordingly. Those are the official terms of your punishment. Harsh scrutiny, a pay cut, and the potential for further increasingly intensive discipline should you break protocol again in any way at all. I'd be grateful if I were you. I'm letting you off gently because you're young and inexperienced. Just know that you'll have your status as a shinobi revoked if anything like this ever happens a second time, the Hokage concluded. Shikamaru sighed and nodded his head. Yeah, I get it. I'll do my best to make the most of it. He said life had suddenly become a fair amount more stressful, but it was nothing compared to what could have happened and likely much better than what he deserved. Good. I think you're a good lad, Shikamaru. In a naive way, your heart was in the right place. You wanted to save a life. There's nothing wrong with that, but you need to understand that there's a time and a place for everything. And the battlefield is no place for mercy. Hiruzen said a bit more evenly. The Nar shook his head and rose to his feet. No, I was just I won't let it happen again. I'll die before I do, he said as firmly as he could. The Hokage remained silent as the genin turned around and headed for the door. Just before he could leave, the old man spoke up. Hakuyuki has been spared from execution. She also won't be imprisoned in a traditional sense. I'm not sure how you feel, but you may see her again at some point. He notified the Nara. A feeling of relief worked its way through Shikamaru's system, but he suppressed the emotion to remain outwardly calm. At least it wasn't pointless. Then, he said in a blank, tired voice. He then gripped the handle on the office door once again. A moment later, he left the office to take a long walk. Satsuki carefully stepped into her dwelling and kicked off her sandals. Her ability to walk had fully returned to her the previous day. And while she was still slightly sore, she was in infinitely better shape than she had been in the Land of Waves. She had seen little of her teammates in the 3 days they had been back home. Shikamaru had expectedly immediately been whisked away by Kakashi to explain to both his parents and the authorities what had transpired on the mission, and Naruto had secluded himself in his apartment. Shikamaru's absence was easily explainable, and it was justified, but Naruto's was slightly concerning. The blonde had been anything but talkative on the journey back from Suna's residence, and his mood had notably dipped compared to his usual joking joviality. It made a fair amount of sense, given just how violently his greatest secret had been laid bare. But no matter how logical it was, the Uchiha girl hardly liked it. I get all sentimental with him and give him a hug and he still goes and gets depressed about it all. She mentally complained. She hardly meant it despite her desire to be irritated. He had every right to be apprehensive about showing his face for the next few days. His own internalized emotions were almost certainly a mess at present. He'll get over it in a few days. I'll make him buy me lunch or something. I did save his life after all. She thought to herself with a chuckle. She then turned her attention to the 2 things she was carrying in either hand. She had never expected to make a voluntary stop at the Yamanaka clan's flower shop at any point in her life, but she had suddenly been struck by the urge during an aimless walk several hours prior. Maybe I am a girl after all, she mused to herself as she took her time making her way to her room. Having not only an entire house, but an entire clan compound to herself had its perks, but one of its many drawbacks was the issue of cleaning. Though she usually made sure to pick up any stray trash that lay about, she hardly ever dusted more than a few times per year. As such, a film of dust had settled on most of the surfaces that weren't her room, kitchen, or bathroom. I should hire a maid. I've probably got the money to do it, the raven-haired girl pondered absently. Before she could sink into any more mundane and uninteresting thoughts, she reached her room and nudged the light switch with her elbow upon entering its open door. Once inside, she took a quick glance around to ensure that everything was as it had been since her departure that morning. Thieves had never been an issue, but for whatever reason, the fear of a break-in had always stuck with the girl throughout her young life. Satisfied with the state of her room, Satsuki walked up to her bed and crawled onto it to reach the windowsill at its head. Once she had made it across, she placed the 2 pots she had bought from the flower shop in the window just above where she slept. After assessing the presence of the 2 new flowers in relation to the rest of her room, Satsuki smiled. Maybe I should decorate more. I like the contrast, she thought to herself proudly. The 2 flower pots had been placed on either side of the window, which was shielded halfway from the sun by a tree in the yard just outside. In the light, she had placed a sunflower. In the shadow of the tree, a black rose. Kakashi absently scratched his cheek as he sat idly across from an old comrade of his. The slowness and mundanity of life had been a fairly common complaint of his throughout his admittedly still limited years, but at present it was a welcome change of pace given all that had transpired recently. Clearing his throat slightly, my guy, the aforementioned comrade, leaned forward across the cafe table. What do you plan to do? Relaxation is always nice, but you picked a bad time for it. I'm sure you know why, the flamboyant Jonin asked curiously. Kakashi sighed and briefly met the man's predictably intense gaze. Yeah, the exams and such. I'll make time to think about it. Until then, I need some downtime. I have a whole lot to sort out as of now, he replied tiredly. Guy raised an eyebrow and stroked his chin. I've avoided the gossip this time around, so I'm mostly in the dark. Care to enlighten me, my dear rival? He asked hopefully. Though he initially considered refusing the request, the copy ninja could find little reason to do so upon further thought. Taking a deep breath, Kakashi straightened his posture and prepared his explanation. You already know Naruto's situation, so I won't bother explaining it to you again. Long story short, the seal broke wide open. On its own, that wouldn't be too bad. I expected it to happen at some point, even if this was a little soon for my tastes. He began earning an attentive nod from Guy as he processed the information. Drumming his fingers on the table, Kakashi fixed his eyes on the glass in his left hand. The thing that makes this whole debacle complicated is why the seal broke. Satsuki just about committed suicide in defense of Nar. Poor kid snapped after he realized what had just happened. He went wild, he said. A darker look then passed over his features, for around 5 minutes. He might have passed me up in terms of raw power. He curb-stomped a hunter who was at least on par with me, he said honestly. Guy shook his head sympathetically and leaned back in his chair. The first kill is always the most difficult. I understand how he feels, he said presumptuously. Much to the flamboyant John's surprise, Kakashi shook his head. He didn't kill her. He definitely tried his hardest to finish the job and probably would have caused her death indirectly if something else didn't happen, he said wearily. With one last breath of preparation, the silver-haired Jonin opened his mouth to conclude his retelling of the events. Shikamaru made the classic mistake of getting to know the enemy a bit too well. Got himself attached. I want to feel bad for him because for most people it have been impossible to know who she really was, but he's too smart for that. Kakashi said after a brief pause to order another glass of water. The copy ninja continued once more. I'll spare you the more intimate details. Long story short, he went out of his way to save her life. I let it happen on a technicality, but he got a serious verbal flogging from Nar. Can't say he didn't have it coming because he did, he concluded. Guy remained silent for a few moments, carefully considering what he had been told. Are you going to discipline him? I certainly would, he asked seriously. The copy ninja glanced off in the direction of the Hokage building before returning his attention to Guy. That's been arranged by Hokage-sama. I have to write field reports on every single mission he participates in for the next few months. Even a few training summaries. He's got to be flawless for a while. He then let out a dry chuckle. Almost feels like I'm being punished. All it amounts to for me is a bunch of paperwork, he joked, drawing a classic wide grin from his comrade, followed by a look of pondering. Are you concerned about how he'll perform under such harsh scrutiny? That kind of pressure can break a kid his age, he inquired. Kakashi waved his hand dismissively at the notion. He'll be fine. He's sharp, even if he's still a tad immature. I'm more worried about how it all impacts the team's chemistry. Nar doesn't seem keen on letting this go. At least not right away, he clarified. Guy raised an eyebrow quizzically. Really, if I have this right, I'd expect Satsuki to be the problem moving forward. It was her life on the line after all, he pointed out. The silver-haired Jonin shrugged his shoulders and cracked a smile under his mask. She actually took it in stride. Well, as much as she could anyway. She definitely didn't like what he did, but she just seemed glad to be alive, he said evenly. He then stood up to his feet and stretched his back. Guy soon joined him. I'm sure you've already considered this, but what do you plan to do about the seal? If stress is what broke it open, then I doubt it stays stable for long once they enter the forest, he asked. Kakashi held his silence momentarily. While the thought had crossed his mind, he didn't have a concrete solution other than simply tightening the seal directly. I don't think there's much I can do about it right now. I'll get it tightened if I can, but other than that, I'll bank on their preparation being enough to keep them out of that kind of danger, he answered. Guy gave a curt nod and turned to exit the cafe. Fair enough, then. Now, come along, my rival. The weather is perfect for a healthy jog, he declared loudly. Kakashi sighed inwardly and trudged along after his eccentric friend, who was already out the door. Letting you pay was a mistake. There's always a catch. Nar rubbed sleep out of his eyes as he labored toward the door of his apartment. He had been awoken by the sound of knocking, and try as he might to ignore it, he simply couldn't bring himself to fully block it out. He hardly ever received visitors, so the presence of one piqued his interest whether he liked it or not. $10 says it's just Kakashi-sensei. He thought to himself, tiredly turning the door handle as the thought crossed his mind. As it turned out, he was incorrect. Instead of his teacher standing outside his dwelling, it was Satsuki. Very much unlike the blonde, she was fully dressed, appeared to have showered, and was wide awake. Kind of early to start pushing my buttons. Don't you think? He opened, hardly veiling the annoyance in his voice. The Uchiha girl glanced into his apartment and pointed past him at the clock on his wall. It's noon, actually. And besides, no time is too early to wind you up a little. She jeered at him. Naruto sighed heavily, both at the fact that he had so badly overslept and because Satsuki was as antagonistic as ever. She did promise me she would treat me like normal, though he reminded himself. When framed this way in his mind, his teammate's attitude actually lifted his spirits a tad. Indeed, nothing had changed. What do you want? I'm too tired to argue with you if that's what you're here for, he pressed, leaning against his door frame as he spoke. Satsuki grinned provocatively. You're going to buy me lunch, she said in a far too pleased tone. The blonde stood up straight again. Even if I wanted to do that, which I don't, I'm broke. You know that as well as I do, he shot back. The raven-haired girl snorted and lightly kicked him in the shin. We got our paychecks for the escort assignment yesterday morning. You've got money, she corrected. Naruto's left eye twitched. Either she was exceedingly hungry or bound and determined to needle him. Likely both. You suck. You know that, he grumbled. Satsuki smirked and stepped back away from his front door. And you swallow. Now go shower and put a shirt on, she ordered him. The ginger's face gained a light shade of color at the realization that he was in fact shirtless. Begrudgingly deciding to do as he was told, Naro shut his front door and threw together an outfit from his limited selection of clothing and took a brief shower. 5 minutes later, he emerged from his bathroom to an unnerving sight. Who said you could come in here? He asked irritatedly. Satsuki was seated cross-legged on his couch with a shameless look on her face. She knew exactly what she was doing. Nobody said I couldn't. Then again, it's kind of a mess in here, she replied, making a wide gesture around the living room. The blonde quickly scanned the room to ensure that she hadn't stolen anything. I could report you for trespassing, he threatened, though he hardly meant it as anything more than a comeback. Satsuki stood up from her seat and began walking toward the door. The village loser is going to put a pretty girl in jail. Huh, I'm shaking, she retorted lightly. Nar muttered an insult regarding his appearance under his breath, but didn't dare raise his volume high enough for her to hear him as he followed her out of his apartment, quickly catching up with his teammate once they were in the hallway. Naruto took a sideways glance at her face. Unsurprisingly, she looked pleased with herself. We're splitting the bill, he decided aloud. Satsuki gave no verbal response. But a moment later, Naruto tripped over her outreaching ankle and stumbled forward, barely managing to catch himself before crashing down the stairs ahead. What was that? Couldn't hear you over your 2 left feet. The Uchiha girl asked with faux innocence. The blonde wanted with every fiber of his being to strike out at her, but that would mean letting her bully him, and he wouldn't let her enjoy herself any more than he already had. I said that we're splitting the bill. I've still got to, pay rent, he said as calmly as he could given his rising temper. Satsuki strolled past him and down the first few steps. You can't relate. I basically own a neighborhood free of charge, she said proudly, though her voice held an undertone of veiled sadness. Nar opted to change the topic, having easily detected the undercurrent of her mood. Got any news on what exactly we're going to be getting up to as a team? He asked. Satsuki glanced back over her shoulder at him and shrugged. Nothing specific, but I doubt much changes. Probably just more D-ranked assignments, she said. Before Naruto could say anything in response, the Uchiha girl corrected herself. Well, actually, I did hear that the Chunin exams are coming up next month, she recalled. The Jingariki gave a skeptical look as they both reached the ground floor of the apartment complex. We've been genning for less than 2 months. Feels a little soon for that sort of thing, don't you think? He said pointedly. Satsuki pondered his logic briefly. Sure, but we also survived and completed what was pretty much an A- rank mission. We've got the resume for it based on that alone, she countered. Nar squinted a bit as they exited the building and stepped out into the open sunlight. I kind of feel like that was a fluke, he said honestly. Satsuki glanced at him out of the corner of her eyes and studied him. She then allowed herself to laugh a bit. I died and you turned into an oversized Wolverine. Definitely not the most consistent process for completing assignments, she said humorously. Naruto rolled his eyes and kicked a rock into the side of a nearby garbage can as they walked along toward wherever Satsuki had in mind. You didn't even see what I looked like, he muttered. The raven-haired girl brushed a strand of her dark hair behind her left ear. True, you probably weren't oversized. You're shorter than me, she relented. Nar prickled at the jab to his ego, straightening his posture as much as he could. He was dismayed to find that she was correct. Not my fault. You're a giant, he said in an attempt at deflection. Satsuki snickered and pulled him off down another street to their left by his shirt collar. I'm 5 feet 8. You're just short, she said. They then fell into a neutral silence. Within the next several minutes, they reached their destination. Once they were standing at the restaurant's entrance, Naruto shot a glare at his teammate. Oh, hell no, he said bluntly. It was an upscale establishment, to say the least. Entry usually required a friend on the inside or money. And needless to say, the blonde had neither. Satsuki gave him a smug look. What? A little too nice for you? She asked. Nar gave her a bored look and shoved his hands in his pockets. No, I just don't feel like being a circus animal for a bunch of rich underscore, he said sharply. The Uchiha girl's lips pulled into a smirk. I'm rich and you definitely think I'm an underscore, so I don't really think going in there would change much, she said. Nar turned on his heel and began walking across the street toward a much cheaper Erie. Yeah, but in your case, it's just blood money. He fired back. He had known it was a vicious retort when he'd thought of it a moment earlier, but he hardly cared. Satsuki's eyes widened just a tad at his words. You. She hissed as she reluctantly followed him to his chosen restaurant. Nar grinned to himself. For once, he had beaten her. At least get me drunk first, he said jokingly. Unlike every other time he had taken a shot at her, Satsuki didn't reply. Instead, she silently sulked as she walked into the affordable cafe after him. As a silent apology for his final quip, Naruto did in fact buy Satsuki lunch that day. Shikamaru kept his eyes fixed firmly ahead of him, his field of vision jarring slightly with every heavy step he took along the dirt road of Konoha's eastern main street. It was late, nearly 11 o'clock, and he was out on a jog. He had always hated running. It was boring, exhausting, and made him painfully sore for days to come afterward. Unfortunately, he had little say in the matter. His mother had demanded that he take a 3-mile run every night before bed as punishment for his actions in the wave country. I'd have taken a basic grounding over this any day of the week. He mentally complained. Despite his dislike of the punishment, he was well aware that he had little room to fuss. He deserved to be reprimanded and disciplined. Truth be told, he had been led off easy as a show of good faith and confidence, shaking these thoughts from his mind for the time being. The genin picked up his pace a bit. The sooner he was done, the better. He was roughly a mile and a half in, and he was already exhausted. Compared to his teammates, he was in awful physical shape, finding that his small yet extent competitive side flared up a bit at this notion. Shikamaru clung to the feeling of inadequacy. It's a drag, but I'm not going to be useless. I'll do more than just sit by and watch next time, he thought to himself, gritting his teeth as he pushed up his pace even further. He was soon bordering on a sprint. He was now fueled by a new emotion, one other than annoyance or resignation. He was angry with himself. Time and again, he gave the minimum amount of effort. He had nearly flunked tests he easily could have aced had he bothered to study for even a single hour. He had scraped by his physical tests when basic exercise would have made them simple. Worst of all, he had been careless in the face of danger. He had always prided himself in his ability to go where the wind took him, as he liked to tell himself. But he had now learned the hard way that there was no room for complacency in his life as he now knew it. You put your teammates' lives in danger because you got all up in your feelings for a stranger. Satsuki almost died because of you. He beard himself. His legs ACHD and his legs burned, but he didn't care. The pain was warranted and you got what you wanted. Haku survived. You got away with murder. You selfish. His inner voice continued. Only a mile to go now. He was running on empty from the blistering pace, but he did not allow himself to slow down. You could have stopped her before the fight even started. You had her wide open and comfortable. You knew it was her. You knew. He chided himself further. For as much as he wished he was lying to himself, he knew that this was the first rush of self-awareness he had experienced since the mission. He had to face the facts, and they were ugly. Half a mile left, the end was in sight. The sector's clinic was visible in the distance. It had been his starting point for the triple-mile loop he had mapped out for the run. But you didn't stop her, did you? You kept on coming. You kept on lying to yourself. You let your feelings take control. You created the disaster that came next. He mentally bellowed. He promptly tripped over his own feet and took a hard forward fall. With his face in the asphalt, Shikamaru dug his fingers into the rough ground. He wouldn't let it happen again. He would ensure that fact even if it killed him. I'll put you guys first next time. And every time after that, he wheezed aloud as he dragged himself to his feet and hobbled past the clinic to complete his run with a badly scraped knee and a few pointed pebbles stuck in his forehead. Unbeknownst to him, his final crash and subsequent declaration had not gone unheard. As Shikamaru trekked his way home, a certain blonde Jingariki slipped out of the alley, a spark of respect having been reignited. I'm sorry for dragging you all out here so early, but we have a lot to get done today. Team 7 all gave a collectively tired nod. It was before sunrise, hardly after 4 in the morning, and they were all situated in a dew-dampened field on the outskirts of Konoha. Just a single week had passed since their arrival back home from the land of waves, a week they had been given to rest. But even so, the abrupt return to such brutal meeting times was hardly enjoyable. Sensing that none of the teens were particularly keen on instigating, Kakashi cleared his throat. As I'm sure you've all heard, the Chunin exams are scheduled for the end of next month. I'd honestly forgotten about them myself until recently, which makes it rather short notice for you three, he began. Shikamaru then raised his hand, prompting the Jonin to nod in his direction. Don't you think it's a little irresponsible to sign us up for it? We're still new to being Gen. He asked tiredly. Kakashi folded his arms across the front of his flak jacket. No, I don't think it is. Your cell is something of a special case as far as Genin teams go. I know a fair few Chuninhood lose to both Naruto and Satsuki head to head, and you're smarter than most Jonin, he replied. Satsuki then followed Shikamaru's example and raised a labored hand. That's probably true, but you need more than just strength or smarts to get a promotion. You need both, she pointed out, not bothering to wait to be called on before speaking. Nar nodded along with her in agreement. The copy ninja smiled under his mask. If they had learned anything from their experiences in the land of waves, it was to be aware of their limitations. That's exactly why I'm signing you three up. All of you have one half of the recipe. Shikamaru, you're smarter than I am in some respects, but you're nothing to write home about in combat. Nar, you're tough, resourceful, and destructive, but you're reckless and unintuitive. He said, earning a glare from his blonde student. Kakashi then looked toward the Uchiha girl, and you're the most well-balanced of the team. But you're about as flexible as a steel pipe, he said calmly. The raven-haired girl simply scoffed in response. To summarize, you all have some potent strengths, especially for your age and level of experience, but I haven't seen the ancillary skills required of an independent ninja yet, he said conclusively. Nar, who still looked mildly perturbed at having been described as unintuitive, frowned. Then why have us take this exam at all? Sounds to me like you don't think we can pass it, he inquired. Kakashi produced a kunai and began twirling it around one of his index fingers. Because it'll be a good learning experience either way. It wouldn't even shock me if one of you managed to become a tunin. You're all talented enough. It just comes down to how adjustable you are, he said smoothly. He then let the blade fly from his fingertips, accurately pinning a dragonfly to the bark of a nearby tree. Now, onto what we'll be doing today, he began immediately, earning the undivided attention of his team. The Chunin exams are broken up into 3 distinct phases, a written test, a survival round, and one-on-one combat. The second of those phases are what we'll be focusing on. From now until sundown, you three will be acting as prey, and I'll be acting as the hunter, he continued, eyeing up each of the genin to test their reactions. Satsuki merely shifted slightly. Naruto met his eyes head-on, and Shikamaru gave an exasperated sigh. Taking a mental note of each, Kakashi reached into his pouch and took out 3 coins. He then tossed one to each of his students. Seeming to catch on rather quickly, Nar pocketed his. I'm guessing we have to keep these away from you, he asked. The silver-haired ninja gave a thumbs up and watched as Satsuki and Shikamaru followed Naruto's example by stowing away their coins. Think of it as an inversion of the bell exercise. That drill focused on offensive teamwork, while this one focuses on defensive teamwork. You'll be needing a bit of both next month, Kakashi said. The sun then began to peek over the horizon just a tad. You aren't allowed to leave the forest, but other than that, the rules will be broadly the same as they were for the bells, but in reverse. Only one of you needs to have a coin by the end. But if at any point I manage to take all 3, the exercise is over, and you're all running laps around the village tomorrow, he said, drawing a fearful shudder from Team 7. Even Nar, who ran regularly, despised Kakashi's brand of endurance training. Needing no further verbal prompting, the three genin turned their attention toward the trees. Sensing that they were ready to begin, Kakashi held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, and then 0. In an instant, they were off, vanishing into the foliage of the forest before them. Opting to give them a head start, Kakashi casually strolled toward the edge of the wooded area. He needn't rush. He held an enormous edge in skill in regards to both stealth and tracking. If I actually try, this will be way too quick for them to learn anything. I'll give them a few chances each, he decided. Once enough time had elapsed for the genin to have made a fair amount of distance between themselves and their teacher, Kakashi leapt up onto a branch and pushed off. The hunt was on. Naruto's eyes darted side to side as he strained his ears. Roughly 20 minutes had passed since he and the rest of his team had set out into the forest, and up till the present moment, things had been unnervingly peaceful. Despite the lack of danger or action, he couldn't shake the unwavering feeling that they were being watched. You feel it, too, don't you? Asked Satsuki, snapping the blonde from his trance with a flinch. Nar swallowed and nodded. It was an unpleasant feeling, but not one any of the three were unused to. Not after what they'd gone through in facing Zabuza. I think we're fine for now. He isn't nearby yet, Shikamaru, who had been largely silent since their entrance into the forest, said with surprising confidence. Satsuki raised an eyebrow at his assuredness. How can you be so sure? He's way better at this than we are, she said. The Nar paused for a moment, causing the rest of the cell to follow suit. After an uncomfortable few moments, he began walking again. My family goes hunting a lot. It's not quite the same as this, but it's given me a decent sense of when someone or something is close by, and right now, I feel relatively safe, he explained. Naruto managed to relax himself slightly. Yeah, I've heard you guys own a deer reserve outside of the village. Kakashi-sensei is probably a little smarter than those things, though, he said. Shikamaru gave a low chuckle. You be surprised, he said. A dash of humor in his voice. Before any of the three could add on to the conversation, Satsuki let out a shrill shriek as she was violently ripped off the ground by the ankle. Responding quickly, Naruto launched a kunai just above the Uchiha girl's leg, resulting in a metallic snapping sound. Satsuki then fell back down again, following through on the momentum with a forward roll to break her fall. Are you sure he's not close by? The raven-haired Kunoichi complained, cutting off a snag of metal wire from her ankle as she spoke. Nar curled and UNC curled his fingers. His heart was racing. I think he was right. If he were close to us, he'd have snatched you up before I could cut you down. I think he was here, the blonde said stiffly. Shikamaru nodded in agreement. That means he either planted traps before the exercise even started or he slipped past us a while back without any of us noticing, he deduced. Satsuki stood back up to her feet with a WSE, something Nar caught onto immediately. Your ankle is swollen, he said, pointing to her visibly damaged leg. His teammate gritted her teeth and stepped forward. I can still walk. It's nothing, she said in a pained tone. Shikamaru pursed his lips and glanced off in each direction at their surroundings. Even if you can walk, you're going to need to run and jump pretty soon. This is a problem, he said. Seriously. Satsuki gave him a harsh look. What are we supposed to do about it? We just have to find a way around this, she said firmly. Nar thought for a moment, searching his mind for solutions to the issue at hand. He said that we only need to have 1 coin in total, right? If that's the case, then maybe it would be best if we split off in different directions, he suggested. Shikamaru frowned at this. It's a team-building exercise. Don't you think that'll just get us yelled at? He asked. Nar shrugged his shoulders. Scattering is a thing people do in combat. It's a team strategy, he argued. Satsuki then hobbled her way between the two boys. I think Naruto's got it right for once. With all of us in one place, if Kakashi finds us, we're screwed. If we spread out, we can at least slow him down and warn each other, she said. Nar snickered and grinned. All it took was a sprained ankle for you to see how smart I am, he said jokingly, earning himself a mean elbow to the ribs from Satsuki. Before they could begin bickering, Shikamaru cut in. There's logic to that, but he's definitely going to go after you first, and with that injured ankle, you're easy pickings. Well, be down a coin by default, he reasoned. Nar glanced at Satsuki for a moment before responding. I'll stay with Satsuki. You go off on your own, he said. The Nar boy furrowed his brow at the suggestion. How's that going to help anything? No offense, but you can't really protect her from him. Hell, just take your coin, too, he asked. Nar responded by producing his coin and popping it in his mouth, much to the confusion of his teammates. What are you? Satsuki began, trailing off into shocked silence after the blonde made a gulping sound. It was metallic and bitter, but Naruto managed to keep his breakfast down. He had swallowed his coin. He's got to find it first, he said with a sly grin. Satsuki covered her face with one of her hands and shook her head. The metal they make these with is probably toxic if you digest it, dumbass, she said incredulously. Nar shrugged and wiped his lips clean. Oh well, for now my coin is safe, he said, seemingly deciding that any further discussion would simply be a waste of time. Shikamaru took several steps away from his teammates. Let's meet back up in a few hours to regroup. If we all have our coins by then, we'll stick together. If not, we'll split up again, he said, receiving a pair of nods in return. If you meet a hot chick in the woods again, at least try to make sure she isn't going to try to kill us this time. Nar called out to him as he walked away. The Nar boy grumbled something unintelligible in return. With that, Shikamaru jumped up into the trees and vanished, leaving Naruto and Satsuki alone. Satsuki wiped sweat from her brow with her free hand as she and Naruto trekked along down a footbeaten forest path. A little over 4 hours had passed since they had split off from Shikamaru. And as was the experience while the cell had been whole, little had happened. There had been minor scares regarding traps, but they had managed to evade or escape all of them without injury. While the traps themselves were far from intimidating individually, they lent credence to the idea that Kakashi had rigged the forest in advance. Cheap bastard. You're already better at this than we are. You could at least play fair, she thought to herself in irritation. She then felt Nar breathe in deeply, causing her to glance to her left where he resided. The blonde looked exhausted. Sweat was running down his face, and his breathing was growing more labored. It was unsurprising as her ankle had swollen further. Satsuki had found herself completely unable to walk. In turn, Naruto had offered to support her weight on her injured side. In short, Naruto had essentially been carrying her for at least an hour and a half. The Uchiha girl kept her eyes fixed on him as they awkwardly walked along. If you need a break, I can try walking on it again, she offered. Nar shook his head and rolled one of his shoulders to relieve stiffness. I'm fine. It's just a furnace in here. I almost think the shade is making it worse somehow, he said. Satsuki blinked a drop of sweat out of her eye. If you think you're miserable, try having long hair. I'm basically cooking under a blanket, she said. Nar shifted his grip across her back and picked up the pace at which they were walking. Yeah, my arm stuck under that blanket, too. Pretty sure it's melting, he said humorously. The Uchiha girl then spotted a wide trunk tree up ahead. Let's rest against that tree for a few minutes. We both need to breathe a little, I think, she insisted. Though he initially seemed poised to argue, Naruto relented, walking them both over to the large dome of bark and sitting down with Satsuki in tow. For several moments, they sat in silence. You can let go of me now, Nar, the raven-haired girl said in reference to Naruto's arm, which was still laced around her back. The blonde quickly pulled his arm back and let it rest in his lap. Sorry, he muttered. When another lapse of silence threatened to take hold, Satsuki prevented it with a rare attempt at humor. You think I could sue Kakashi for indirectly injuring me inside the village? She asked jokingly. Nar cracked a smile. I mean, you'd probably win the case. We both know he'd be a no-show in court, he said. The Uchiha girl held down a laugh. As light as the moment was, they still needed to remain undetected. I probably wouldn't do it, though. Not like I need the money. Besides, I don't really want to get moved to another team over something that dumb or at all really, she said. Nar raised an eyebrow. Really, I figured you'd kill to not have to work with me, he said skeptically. Satsuki felt her face heat up a tad. Unwittingly, she had backed herself into a conversational corner. Somebody's got to keep you in line. Might as well be me, she said, her tone coming out far more meek than she'd have liked. The Jingaree gave her a sideways smirk. Oh yeah, I never took you for the territorial type, he said in a surprisingly suggestive tone. The Uchiha girl swallowed a small lump in her throat. For perhaps the first time since she had known him in any meaningful way, Naruto had well and truly put her on the back foot. Is he flirting with me? Him of all people? She wondered in a mild panic. Sensing that her window to respond was closing, Satsuki blurted out the first thing that came to mind. It's not like anybody else is going to want you anyway, she said quickly. The moment the rushed response left her mouth, the Uchiha girl slapped a hand over her lips. It was comically mean, but also had other far more embarrassing implications. For better or worse, Naruto only seemed to pick up on the more antagonistic side of things. I was just trying to keep things light, he muttered dejectedly. For all the insults he could take in stride, it appeared that anything to do with neglect was a touchy topic. Suddenly feeling quite guilty, Satsuki drew her knees up to her face and rested her chin on one of them. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Nar turned his head to face her, seeming rather surprised to have received an apology. After a time, he turned his attention back to the foliage ahead of him. You're all good, he said neutrally, letting out the small breath she had been unknowingly holding. Satsuki straightened her legs out in front of her again. Before anything more could be said, another voice cut in. Sometimes I miss my teenage years, but watching you two was giving me secondhand embarrassment. Immediately shooting up to her feet despite the pain in her ankle, soon followed by Nar, the pair scanned the canopy around them. Though it did not take them long to locate the source of the voice, what they found was Daming. Nonchalantly hopping down from a branch roughly 20 feet over their heads, Kakashi landed across the path from the two genin. Tucked under his right arm was Shikamaru, who was conscious but visibly beaten up. Not sure why you thought sitting down was a great idea, but then again, Nar went and swallowed his coin, so I really shouldn't be surprised, the jonin said with a sigh. Nar jammed an indignant finger at Shikamaru. You told him, he yelled. The lazy genin rubbed the side of his head and craned his neck up to face his angry teammate. It was either that or he said he'd waterboard me. He shot back. Dire as the situation was, Satsuki couldn't help but find some humor in it all. Eccentric as they both were, they were unflinchingly themselves. No matter the situation, sell out. Naruto hissed accusingly, though his face looked more flustered than angry. Kakashi then tossed Shikamaru over to the pair, landing on the ground with a dull thud. The Nar boy rolled over onto his back slowly. Ow! He groaned weakly. Kakashi promptly vanished from view. When he reappeared, he was directly behind Satsuki. He then swiped her kunai pouch, which was attached to her left thigh. Two down, he began quickly, finding the raven-haired Kunoichi's coin buried in the pouch before she could even begin to stop him. He then vanished once more, this time reappearing in front of Nar. One to go, he concluded, sinking his fist into the blonde's stomach a beat later. In a surprisingly clean procedure, the Jinguei coughed painfully, somehow spitting out the coin he had swallowed in the process. Kakashi easily swiped the bile-soaked coin out of the air before it could hit the ground. The jonin then strolled back over to his side of the path and presented the 3 coins, one lodged in each gap between his fingers. That's all 3, you lose, he said with a patronizing masked smile. All 3 genin sighed heavily. They had been beaten and not after a particularly grueling contest. Did you have to punch me? You could have just squeezed it out of me or something. Naruto complained, still catching his breath from the blow to his abdomen. Kakashi shook his head. You do realize that every moment that coin was in your stomach, you were at risk of lead poisoning, right? He pointed out. Satsuki snickered a bit as Naruto muttered a convoluted excuse. Anyway, you 3 definitely have work to do. Get used to this sort of drilling because it'll be most of what we're doing for the next little while, he revealed, earning a unified groan from Team 7. Well, since it's only around 7 in the morning still, let's get back to the clearing. We'll do some basic taijutsu until noon and then knock out a few public service assignments. After that, you're free. Sound reasonable? He suggested. Satsuki nodded, prompting her teammates to follow suit. After a few minutes rest, the group made their way out of the forest again. Hai snapped out of his work-induced trance as the sound of a knocking on the door to his office hit his ears. It was evening and the hot temperature of the midday had finally begun to cool somewhat. It was the ideal time to make daily errands without drowning in one's own sweat. Enter. The elderly leader called out to the person on the opposite side of the door. Slowly creaking open, Kakashi Haki's form was slowly revealed just outside of the office. Finding himself relieved that his guest was not another marble-mouthed diplomat. Hiruzen smiled. I was expecting you a bit earlier, I must say. He greeted the younger man. Kakashi scratched the back of his head awkwardly. If I told you that I had to help an elderly woman cross the street, would you buy that? He asked. Hai chuckled and set aside his pen and documents. Not in the slightest. Now I trust you have a report written as I requested. He inquired. The copy ninja nodded and slid a file across the Hogue's desk. It's pretty short, but it's thorough, he affirmed. Here initially moved to open the file and assess its contents, but opted to wait. Before I read the official version of things, how do you feel he did today? He asked. Kakashi shrugged and adjusted his forehead protector to better cover his left eye. Things went smoothly, both in training and during the cleanup jobs I had them do. There's some tension between him and Naruto, but nothing too bad, he said. The Hokage gave a satisfied nod. Good to hear. I've heard that you plan on having them participate in this year's exam. Is that true? He asked curiously. The John sighed and sat himself down in one of the free chairs in the room. Everybody I talked to is grilling me on that decision, he grumbled. Hizen cracked a smile at the younger man's reaction. I actually like the idea, but I think you can understand how strange it sounds. They have less than 20 D-rank missions on their resume, and while they technically completed an A-rank mission recently, it was hardly because they were ready for it, he said. Kakashi's expression remained tired and half-lidded. The kids had the same reaction. Even Satsuki and Nar seem apprehensive about it. Like you said, there are plenty of reasons to be nervous, but I don't see the harm in letting them fail. That's how you learn, he said, stretching his arms across himself a bit. I'm not even convinced they can't pass. Shikamaru specifically might actually do just fine if he puts his mind to it, he added. Here is an eyed Kakashi intently. And what makes you think I'd give him that promotion so soon after what he did in the Land of Waves? He asked. The copy ninja met his gaze because you like him. All three of them. Actually, Naruto would have gotten expelled from the academy years ago if it weren't for you. The Uchiha sector would have been seized if you hadn't pulled some strings, and Shikamaru would have been suspended if you hadn't taken it easy on him in your official write-up to the council, he listed calmly. The Hokage remained silent for a time, but soon relented. Guilty as charged, I suppose. I simply feel that expecting people as young as they are to face such harsh consequences for mistakes they were always going to make sooner or later, he said honestly. Kakashi glanced off into empty space. The guilt of letting people down tends to be enough to straighten them out most of the time. Then again, that guilt never gets any easier to cope with, even for the strongest people, he said, an odd hollowness to his voice. I easily caught on to what he was referring to consciously or not. Your boy still misses you, Tsukumo. The elderly leader thought sadly. He then cleared his throat and straightened his posture. How has Naro been? If I recall correctly, the seal slipped to an alarming degree after Satsuki fell to the huntress. How is he handling it? He asked, effectively changing the subject without a fuss. He seemed more or less like himself. I think he told Satsuki the truth because she's been reading up on Lord Fourth since we got back. As for Shikamaru, I'm not sure if they've talked about it, but I'm pretty sure he's pieced it together on his own, the Jonin reported. Hai stroked his thin beard. I'd hoped that he would be able to tell them on his own time, but perhaps that was wishful thinking. The stress of his first few real assignments were always going to put his stability to the test, he said thoughtfully. He then glanced at the clock. Luckily, he still had time. How do you feel they're getting along in general? The elderly leader asked. Kakashi thought for a moment. Better than I expected. Actually, he said vaguely. Here motioned for him to continue, to which the younger man obliged. They don't fight about anything major very often and even seem to like each other a fair bit when things are calm. Naruto and Satsuki give each other a pretty amazing amount of grief every time they're within 50 feet of each other, but that's just the way they are. Shikamaru gets along fine with both from what I've seen, though he can be a bit detached, he explained. He then laughed a bit. Honestly, I enjoy being their teacher. They give me a reason to wake up every day that doesn't involve a paycheck, he said. The Hokage felt himself relax. It wasn't perfect, but Team 7 was still very much functional according to what he was being told. I'm glad to hear it. You're free to go, he said. Kakashi nodded and stood up. Moments later, he was out the door, leaving Hiazen alone once more. Once he could no longer hear Kakashi's footsteps, the old man took hold of his pen and slid a stack of paperwork in front of him. A long sigh escaped his lips. I should hire another secretary. Nar stared up at his ceiling through the pitch black of his room. He had been trying and failing to sleep for upwards of an hour, and his luck didn't appear to be getting any better. Whether he liked it or not, he was wide awake. A week and a half had passed since Kakashi's intentions to enroll Team 7 in the Chunin exams had been made known to them, and each passing day was only becoming more difficult. The drilling was endless, and the forest exercises were grueling. Every part of his body was sore, including muscles he had been scarcely aware of beforehand. He could adapt to the physical strain of preparing for something as steep as a promotional exam. But the mental side of things was a different story. Though he had initially not cared much whether he succeeded or not, the revelation that other genin teams from Konoha would be competing changed that sentiment entirely. He now wanted nothing more than to succeed. People in general had always been cruel to the Jinchuriki, but his classmates were among the few whom he held any sort of resentment for as a result of their meanness. Time and again they had mocked his lack of academic acumen, laughed at his countless failed attempts to compete with his more gifted peers and kicked him while he was down. The difference between their treatment of him and that of the adults was small, but it was key. They had not lost anybody or anything to the fox. Indeed, many had not even been born on the day of the attack. They attacked him simply because they could. It was mindless cruelty. And while Naruto could endure the hateful stares of the elder statesmen, for he understood their pain, the fact that he had gone nearly a decade without seriously hurting a single one of his peers was a miracle. Now he had a chance to punish them in a different way. To succeed while they failed, to overcome them in competition for once. This newfound determination to succeed benefited him in the sense that he now wanted to train but hurt him in most others. He now found himself angry when he failed. He had snapped at his teammates more than once in the past several days out of frustration. And while he had made a point of apologizing, he still felt guilty. Shikamaru gets it. He said as much. Even Satsuki blew it off and she's just as angry as you are most of the time. Stop worrying about it. He beard himself. Despite the knowledge that they weren't taking offense to his reactions, the blonde couldn't help but feel rotten. They're the coolest people, you know, and you're getting prickly with them. He mentally sighed. Growling in frustration, Nar rolled off of his mattress and trudged out of his room, to which he had left the door open. I can't even sleep it off anymore, he muttered to himself tiredly. The last thing he wanted to be was conscious. And yet here he was, alert and walking about, dragging himself across the hallway languidly. Nar made his way into his bathroom and switched on the light. Flinching at the sudden brightness, it took the blonde's eyes a moment to adjust to the new shading. Once he was able to open them fully again, he fixed his gaze on the mirror before him. In it, he saw a disheveled reflection. His hair was matted and messy from his time in bed, and his eyes were slightly bloodshot. He was a mess, a tired, irritated mess. He was also without a shirt, thus forcing him to look upon the tattoo on his stomach. It was far from the first time he'd taken a close look at it. He could have drawn it from memory if he needed to. At least it looks cool, he joked to himself aloud. Indeed, the pattern was intricate and expertly drawn. While he knew of its purpose all too well, the single positive Naruto had managed to draw from the tattoo's presence on his body was that the optics of it certainly could have been much worse. Drawing his attention away from his abdomen, Nar then met his own eyes in his reflection. He rarely looked himself in the eyes. It rarely ever spelled good things. He disliked his own face. The whisker markings on his cheeks had been a point of ridicule for years, and he hardly considered himself handsome. Any other opinion of himself would have been shocking, given all that he'd been subjected to day in and day out for as far back as his memory stretched. Sensing his mood dipping even lower than it already was, the blonde fought the urge to look away. It's only going to hurt to keep looking, he reasoned, his eyes drifting down to the counter. For whatever reason, against his better judgment, he forced himself to face his reflection again. Some small part of him refused to back down to his self-loathing, no matter how loudly his logical side screamed for him to stop. For a brief few moments, his reflection remained inoffensive. Comparatively, at least a beat later, however, things shifted. As Naruto blinked to avoid drying his eyes out by staring for too long, his reflection was replaced by a disturbing imposter. Red eyes, pronounced canines, clawed hands resting on the counter, just barely in view. The demon he had been feared to be his entire life. Whether a figment of his imagination or not, the Jinchuriki flinched and tore his eyes away. It never changes. Every single time he lamented. Mirrors had never been his friend, but he always looked, hoping against hope, daring to be optimistic. But the result never differed. All he ever saw was a monster. A disgusting caricature of all that he did not want to be. All that he feared he truly was. Slowly melting down to a sitting position against the wall of his bathroom. Naruto drew his knees up to his face. I hate you, he hissed, gripping the top of his head as he buried his eyes in his knees. He himself hardly knew who he was speaking to. He had promised both himself and his village that he would not hate his abusers. Most of them had a good reason to fear what he represented in their minds. While he certainly wished he could truly hate the fox, he knew deep down that his knowledge of the beast's true nature was too limited for the feeling to be personal. As such, only one option remained himself. If you were worth loving, you could have made peace with them, he whispered to no ears but his own. He had never struck out at them. He had never become the monstrous force they had all lauded him to be. He had done everything possible to be a normal child. He had written an HANDD delivered 1,000 apologies well before his 10th birthday. He had genuinely tried. Despite his best efforts, he was still shunned. A walking calamity as his emotions hit a fever pitch. A burning feeling welled up within him. Within the same minute, a sharp pain in his scalp caused him to cry out. Removing his hands like his hair was a raging fire. Naruto frantically inspected his hands. His nails had lengthened into claws. His logical mind was well aware that the emotional stress had been the culprit, but that part of him was muffled and weak. As 2 streams of blood ran down onto his face from his hairline, the blonde slowly rose to his feet. Staying contained in his apartment was no longer an option. As pained as he was, and as much as he struggled to find any love for himself, he did not want to die. He needed to clear his mind. Stiffly walking out of the bathroom, the Jinchuriki spotted his jacket on the couch in his living room and retrieved it. Throwing it on over his bare skin, Naruto took a deep breath and walked over to his door, opening it. The trek out of his apartment complex was long and awkward as it was somehow even darker outside of his dwelling. Once out in the open air of the night, Naruto took a deep breath. Take me somewhere nicer, wind. The dock had always been a place of peace and quiet, a refuge where few ever ventured, a happy place. Such sentiments were a rarity for Satsuki Uchiha. She was self-admittedly a bleak person. She rarely laughed for any reason other than antagonism, and her ambitions were morbid. She was volatile, dark, and depressing. It wasn't as though she hadn't earned the right to be, more than most, at the very least. Loss was never easy, especially for the young. But to lose nearly everything in such brutal fashion was a misfortune unfit for any age. She desperately wished to forget it all. To move on, to make a life of her own not bound by her bloody past. And yet her greatest conviction, the lone exception to that desire, stood in stark contrast. Suppress it though she did, Satsuki wanted one more bloodbath. Itachiya would pay either with his life or his ability to live it with any comfort. These morbid thoughts were what circulated throughout the Uchiha girl's mind as she carved a deeper and deeper rut into the wood of the dock with a kani. She had planned on going to bed several hours previously, but she had completely lost track of time once the sun set. She had no clue what time it was, but she knew for certain that it was no longer a decent hour. I really should head back, she thought to herself as her kunai dug into the wood for the 1000th time. Despite the thought, she made no move to act on it. The water was at the perfect level to dangle her legs over the edge of the platform without getting wet, and it was pleasantly cool. In most ways, it was a nice night. For reasons she couldn't quite pin down, Satsuki couldn't bring herself to enjoy it. She was calm, but that stability was brittle. It always was. The shattering points of her glass walls were well hidden but incredibly potent. Generally, it was Satsuki herself who allowed those barriers to crack and break. She had yet to let it happen publicly and had no plans to do so. But left to herself, it was always a looming possibility. Finally, having grown bored of carving into the wood, Satsuki leaned forward to glimpse the water below. What she saw brought a smile to her face. A fish dancing just below the surface. It was fairly small, likely a salmon of some kind. Though she had never taken up fishing as a hobby, the raven-haired girl had always enjoyed watching aquatic life. There was a serenity to them that she found pace in. If the fish can still swim, then the world isn't totally broken. Satsuki thought to herself humorously. Unserious as the notion was at its surface, the message was one she clung to. No matter how painful life could become, there were always reasons to see it through to the next day. Surprisingly, the fish remained in view for several more moments. "We be my friend?" she quietly asked the small creature. In a mean twist of timing, her question coincided with the fish's decision to retreat. Suddenly shifting in place, the salmon flicked its tail above the surface and launched itself deeper into the water. Within seconds, it was invisible. That was mean, you know. The Uchiha girl pouted to the long-gone fish. In its wake, the salmon had left a cascade of ripples, diluting the mirror-esque quality of the surface. Staring into the outward branching patterns, Satsuki squinted a tad at the flickering light of the moon's reflection. Slowly but surely, the ripples died down, returning the surface of water to its calm self. Once it had settled completely, the Uchiha girl found herself staring at a face other than her own. Makoto Uchiha had taken the place of the girl's reflection. Though she had noticed weeks earlier that she was resembling her mother more and more by the day, the fact that it took her several moments to tell the difference unsettled her greatly. "Why?" Satsuki whispered as she stared the ghost from her past in the eyes. Though the reflection's expression matched her own and moved as she did, the genin found herself fearful that she would be grabbed and pulled into the water at any moment. Then the reflection altered. Within moments, Makoto's face morphed into that of Satsuki's late father, Fugakuwa, the man whom she had both respected and resented throughout her childhood. His expression, unlike Makoto's, was not a mirror of his daughter's. It was as stern and standoffish as it always had been. "Say something." Satsuki hissed at the image of her father. Though she knew no words would come, that didn't stop her from desperately wishing. Gradually, tears welled up in her eyes. "Why didn't you stop him? You were always stronger than him. He knew it, too." She choked out. All too familiar scenes played in her mind between her mounting sobs. Then, for the final time, the image in the water changed. When it concluded its metamorphosis, the reflection held the last face Satsuki wanted to see. Her brother, his face speckled with the blood of his kin. Unlike with both of her parents' reflections, the young had no words for the image she now saw. Instead, she instantly reached back and seized the kunai she had used to cut into the dock. Taking a tight hold of the blade, Satsuki swung down at the water to dissipate the reflection completely. Though she succeeded in erasing the portrait of her past, she lost her balance and tumbled over the edge of the dock, sending her plunging into the water. As she sank under the icy water, Satsuki let out a pained scream. The water suppressed any noise she made. Her cries of anguish went unheard as they always did. Forcing her way back up to the surface, Satsuki burst from the water and gripped the edge of the wooden platform. Painstakingly pulling herself up onto it, the raven-haired girl coughed up water. Remaining still for a time, Satsuki shivered in the cold of the night. Angry, sad, and confused, she shakily rose to her feet. Then, with no thought for where she planned on going, Satsuki took off running. Naruto opened and closed his hands gingerly. His nails had retracted to their normal length several minutes ago, but a dull ache remained in the tips of his fingers. Thankfully, it did not appear that his toenails had ever changed in length, as his feet felt perfectly normal. He had been walking aimlessly through the streets of Konoha for nearly an hour. He had not seen or heard from another soul in that time. It was a welcome change of pace in comparison to several of his more ill-fated late-night walks. He had calmed somewhat, though his emotions remained a jumbled mess. He routinely held back the urge to let a few tears fall. He was not happy, though he was quite a bit less unstable than he had been earlier in the night. Rounding a corner, Naruto found himself at the intersection of several roads, leaving a large empty space of asphalt. Breathing deep to take in the nighttime air, the blonde allowed himself to relax a bit. He was still himself, and that was worth some joy. In the distance, just beyond his field of clear view, a figure was approaching. As Naruto caught sight of the oncoming form, he stopped in his tracks, opting to wait for it to get closer before reacting. What he found as the person grew closer drew a wide-eyed stare from the Jinchuriki. What is she? He began, trailing off as Satsuki, who looked rather distressed, stumbled her way into the town square. Soon enough, they were standing opposite one another on the empty asphalt. The Uchiha girl appeared to be wet as her dark hair stuck to the sides of her face and her clothes seemed to hug her body more than usual. As he made this observation, she noticed his presence. Hey, funny meeting you out here. Nar greeted her awkwardly from a fair distance away. Satsuki simply nodded in response. Finding her lack of a characteristic quip or jab concerning, Nar furrowed his brow and slowly made his way across the town square. Once he was within a few feet of her, he stopped. It was then that he saw that her frame was shaking. You're drenched. What happened to you? The blonde asked. It took her a moment, but eventually the raven-haired genin shrugged. I fell into a pond. She said blankly. Nar patiently awaited further explanation, but it soon became clear that he wouldn't receive any more information than he already had. Before he could come up with another question to ask, Satsuki sniffled audibly. Her eyes were cast to the ground and shivers aside, she appeared on the verge of tears. With hesitant hands, Naruto gripped her by the shoulders. Tell me what's up. Something's wrong. You can't fool me. He pressed gently. Satsuki shook her head and remained quiet, but surprised the Jinchuriki greatly by stepping forward and leaning her head onto his shoulder. Awkward as he was, even Naruto knew what the gesture meant. Wrapping her up in both arms, he pulled his teammate into a hug. Though she made no move to return the embrace, the Uchiha girl did not struggle. Please talk to me at least a little. Nar requested. Satsuki's body shook slightly as she audibly fought back a sob. I have a good memory and it sucks. She murmured into his shoulder, which she had to bend over slightly to hide herself in since she was a tad taller than he was. Nar nodded and squeezed her, which finally prompted the girl to wrap her own arms around him. For a time, the pair simply stood in a quiet embrace neither quite understood the meaning of. Once a few moments had passed, Satsuki gently made space between them and met his eyes for the first time since their odd encounter had begun. Her gaze then shifted his forehead. You're bleeding, she pointed out, gingerly, tracing one of her fingers along the trails of blood that had dried on his face. Nar looked away from her. I had a moment. It's nothing you need to worry about, he said quietly. Satsuki shook her head and turned his face back towards her with her hands. I'm still going to worry, but you didn't hear that from me, she said, the barest trace of her usual brand of humor sneaking into her hoarse voice. She followed up the response by pulling his head down and forward ever so slightly. She then closed her eyes and pressed her lips against his forehead, holding them there for several moments. When she released him, she spoke, no more moments. Not tonight, at least, she said softly. To call the display of genuine care a surprise would have been a gross understatement, and Naruto's expression showed it. Red in the face and rather confused, Nar said nothing, to which Satsuki followed suit. The raven-haired girl then gave him a ghost of a smile and stepped away, turning back toward the direction from whence she had come with her next step. As she walked away, Nar found that his mood had been lifted. As much as he wished to know where her pain had come from, he respected her right to silence. A minute later, he turned his own back and headed in the opposite direction. Good night, Satsuki, Shikamaru absently chewed on a piece of barbecued meat as the clock ticked repetitively. The past month had been a brutal one. Constant, unending exercise, logic puzzles of every variety, and countless hours spent in the woods. Kakashi had shown them no mercy in their preparation for the Chunin exams. As lackadaisical as the man could seem, the copy ninja was a brutal instructor when the mood struck him. Despite how unpleasant much of the training had been, it was undeniable that every member of Team 7 was in the absolute best shape of their lives. I have abs for the first time ever, Shikamaru pondered, taking another bite from the small plate of meat he was working his way through. At present, he was playing host to Naruto and Satsuki in the Nar household. It had become tradition each week for the cell to gather for a group studying session, as whether they liked it or not, a written test happened to be their first hurdle in the exams. Why do I need to know about triangles to be a ninja? Nar, who was staring resentfully at the pages of a textbook, grumbled. Satsuki, who was seated to the blonde's left, elbowed him in the ribs. Quit whining. If you fail this test, we all fail it. So stop asking why and learn it. She ordered him bluntly. Though Shikamaru had a far stronger grasp on math and geometry than Naruto did, he couldn't help but sympathize with his frustrations. Much of the information Kakashi had assigned them to learn inside and out felt rather pointless. He does have a point if you think about it. The Nar cut in, interrupting a characteristic argument between his teammates. Satsuki raised an eyebrow and cast a skeptical look his way. How so? She inquired. Shikamaru flipped through his notebook, which was painstakingly filled out nearly all the way through. Let's be real. We're never going to use most of this out in the field. If you have the time to calculate wind speed and the exact angle a kunai is going to take when you throw it, you have enough time to do something more useful, he reasoned. The Uchiha girl leaned back in her chair and sighed. Probably true, but don't you think it's important to test whether or not your military force can do basic math? She countered. Shikamaru snorted and rested his cheek on the heel of his palm. I'd hardly call applied physics and advanced geometry basic math. I think a test based around deductive reasoning and situational awareness would be way more useful for our field of work, he said. His face then slid down his inner forearm, eventually laying to rest on its side on the bare wood of the table. Besides, intelligence shouldn't be measured by academics. Some people, no matter how smart they are, just suck at it, he added. Nar grinned and rapped his chest twice with a closed fist. Maybe I'm a genius after all. Then, he proclaimed proudly. Satsuki rolled her eyes and took a sip of water from the glass she had hardly touched. Keep telling yourself that, she murmured tiredly. Once she was done drinking, her hand shot out and closed into a fist. When she opened it, a crushed fly was in her palm. Show off, Naruto said dismissively, though his eyes showed a thinly veiled awe at the girl's reflexive speed. Satsuki responded by reaching across to the table and knocking the blonde's glass of water off the edge. Before it could drop lower than his knee, the Jingury caught the glass without even spilling a drop. Hypocrite. She jeered at him. Shikamaru couldn't help but crack a smile at the exchange. They had become something resembling friends since the conclusion of their stay in the Land of Waves, though in an antagonistic way. Surprising given just how much dislike had existed between them in the beginning. Knock over my food or water and I'll kick you out. The shadow user warned as Naruto eyed his side of the table. The blonde quickly turned his gaze elsewhere, seeming to take the threat seriously. A brief time of quiet then overtook the group as they all returned to their studies with occasional interludes of joint problem solving. I heard a rumor about you once, Nar said vaguely, drawing the shadow user's eyes up from his notes after several minutes of silence. That being, he asked in a monotone voice. Shikamaru Naru was hardly an eventful person, especially during his academy days. Throughout his years of education, he napped, played shogi, and occasionally went out for lunch with Choji Akamaiki. Nothing more or less, the vast majority of the time. I heard that you got an insane score on an IQ test some Jan gave you, Nar said. Satsuki then perked up, taking her attention away from her studies and focusing it on the Nar. Yeah, I heard something like that too a few years back. Wasn't the number something wild like 180? She pondered, looking to Shikamaru for clarification. The lazy gent his lips and suppressed the urge to change the topic. He had long known that it was bound to get out sooner or later, but he still disliked having to talk about it. 204, he said bluntly. Both Naruto and Satsuki's eyes practically popped out of their skulls. Shikamaru sighed heavily, though not unexpected. The reaction was unnerving. He simply wasn't as smart as the score suggested. Not in his own view. Anyway, that's got to be bullshit, Nar said in disbelief. The Nar pensively drummed his fingers on the table. I wish it was. The test was supposed to be off the record. It only happened because a friend of our family got sick of losing shogi games to me. Unfortunately, the academy found out and tried to put me in advanced classes, he recalled. He had been 13 at the time, and even more so than at present, the last thing he had wanted was more work to do. But I just started skipping class, so they put me back into the regular curriculum inside the same month, he concluded. Nar laughed a bit. Sounds like something I would do, he commented. Satsuki closed her notebook and set her pencils aside. She then stood up and glanced at the clock. I'm going to head home. Have fun, dropouts, she said. After finding and thanking Yoshino, Shikamaru's mother, for her continued hospitality, the Uchiha girl left the Nar property, leaving the two boys alone. I don't know about you, but I'm done studying for tonight. Naruto said, closing the textbook sitting in front of him. The Nar nodded in agreement, setting his own materials aside. He then took a deep breath and straightened his posture. He had been awaiting an opportunity to speak with Nar alone for some time without having to request it. He now had such a chance, and he planned on taking it. Hey, Nar, he began awkwardly. The blonde, who had occupied himself amid the silence by fiddling with a random shogi piece he had found on the floor, turned to face his teammate. What's up? He asked. Shikamaru took a moment to consider his words. He rarely found himself in situations that required him to lead, mostly because he socialized very little on his own. I'm sorry for what I did in the Land of Waves, for saving her. For arguing with you, for putting an enemy before my team. All of it. I owe you a serious apology, he said earnestly. It took every bit of will he had to maintain eye contact. He was still ashamed, even nearly 2 months removed from the ordeal. Nar stared at him silently. His expression was difficult to read. Apology accepted, but Satsuki is the one you need to be saying this to, not me, he pointed out. The Nar shook his head and shifted in his chair. I've already tried twice. She blew me off both times. She's tough to even start a conversation with if she doesn't start it herself, he said. Nar winced and flipped the shogi piece he had found like a coin, catching it in his palm a moment later. Yeah, it's not going to be an easy thing to corner her into talking about. She talks to me more than she talks to you, and even then, it's mostly just arguments, he admitted. Shikamaru gave him a knowing look. This last month has me pretty convinced that you two are closer than you let show, he said. Nar, much to the Nar's surprise, did not react defensively. We're not any closer in general than any normal pair of teammates, but I understand her, at least a little bit. She's not as cold as she can come off. She's just guarded. She has good reason to be, too, he said. Despite hardly buying the first part of the blonde's explanation, Shikamaru let go of any further questions he had. The pair then resumed mindlessly entertaining themselves. What I don't understand is just why. Why did you do it? Nar asked after a time. Though his words were vague, it took little thought to discern what he was referring to. Shikamaru kept his gaze fixed on the floor. He had dreaded being asked a question of this sort. During and since, I never thought of a reason why. It just felt right at the time, he said candidly. The blonde glanced at him and finally put down the shogi piece he had continued to play with. Can you come up with a reason? It would make it easier for me to accept your answer, he requested. Shikamaru chewed his inner lip. He had to allow his emotions to speak for him, for any other method would not be genuine. They had been what had controlled him. I've spent most of my life being a wallflower. Before I got assigned to this team, my only friend was Choji, and even he was mostly just the result of our fathers knowing each other, he said, taking a long sip of water in between thoughts. I've always been a ghost, a fixture, never saying anything, never being approached, and never approaching others. I really was satisfied with that. It's all I've ever known, he continued as Nar nodded along. Neither boy was interested in eye contact. They were too deep in thought. Haku didn't give me a chance to be that way. She wouldn't let me be detached. She made me talk to her. She made me do things with her. She asked questions about me. She even coaxed me into telling jokes, if you can believe that, he said, shaking his head as he went. With one last deep breath, he let out his final surge of honesty. I got addicted to it. The feeling of being wanted, of having a person wanting to know stuff about me. Through all of that, I'd even come to care about her, too. I knew who she was deep down. I just didn't want it to be true. I let her lie to me all because I didn't want to come down from that high. He finished. He did not enjoy baring his soul, especially not to another person, but it had to be done. Naruto's face transitioned through a number of emotions rapidly. Each moved too quickly for Shikamaru to pin them down and define them, but it was clear as day that the Jingariki was experiencing a great deal of conflict. We aren't all that different, huh? He finally said after appearing to sort out his own feelings. Shikamaru rubbed his eyes tiredly. Your life's been a lot harder than mine. You deserve some serious credit for still being a decent guy after all you've been through. I was just being selfish, he said. Nar stood up from his seat in response. Don't feel guilty for having a family and a good home. Be grateful for them. Just try not to think with your next time, he said jokingly. Shikamaru groaned and rose to his feet to join him. It wasn't like that, and you know it, he grumbled. Nar walked around the table and slapped a hand on his shoulder. Hey, I hate her guts, but you've got good taste. She was hot, he said with a patronizing smirk on his face. Shikamaru let out a resigned sigh but let himself relax, opting to play along. He gestured toward the door Satsuki had left through. From one guy to another, good luck. She's way too much for you, he said with a wry smile. Naruto's left eye twitched at the comment. I won't need it. I'm not even looking. He shot back unconvincingly. He then dropped his hand from the Nar's shoulder and retrieved his jacket from the back of the chair he had been sitting on. I need to sleep. Thanks for having us again, he said. Shikamaru nodded and showed him to the door. As he walked out into the night, Naruto paused one final time, looking back over his shoulder. Don't feel like you have something to prove to us during the exam. Don't do anything dumb, he said. The blonde then walked away beyond earshot. Once he was truly gone, Shikamaru closed his front door and chuckled to himself. An IQ of over 200, and I'm the one making all the mistakes. A fair distance from Konoha, a quartet of unfamiliar figures trekked on. 3 teenagers and an adult. Their garbs were foreign, their weaponry unusual, and their appearances ever so slightly different ethnically speaking. They were briskly traveling toward the village hidden in the leaves, as it was their final destination. They had been traveling for days on foot, and they were understandably tired. We should pick up the pace, said the tallest of the teens, a blonde girl wielding a large metal fan. Her words drew a tired groan from a boy whose face was done up with purple lines and pale makeup. We're already making decent time, he said between labored breaths as they ran across the sand, which was slowly giving way to tufts of grass and other such plants. The blonde girl shook her head and began to overtake him. The wording was vague on the invitation about when this whole thing starts. We should show up as early as we can, she said. Though he spoke no words, the lone adult in the group, a man with half of his face covered by a cloth, nodded curtly. The entire group then took off at a quicker pace, despite any protest. As they ran, the tops of trees became visible on the horizon. It was a sight to behold for the adolescent members of the cell. They had never been outside of the desert in all their years and had hardly even seen greenery beyond a garden or two. The image of trees tall enough to be spotted from miles away almost seemed impossible. I thought hidden in the leaves was just a title. They really meant it. The fan wielder breathed as the group came to a halt to admire the distant scenery. So much for picking up the pace, the marked boy said jokingly. The girl shot him a hard look from over her shoulder. Can it? We're still going to get there early. I just want to take it all in a little before we get to work. She shot back. The older man then cleared his throat. Temari Conqueror, enough bickering. Save your energy for the home stretch. He ordered. The blonde girl named Temari rolled her eyes. She then turned to the 4th member of the cell, a red-headed boy who stood just a tad shorter than Conqueror, who himself was a good deal shorter than Baki, the oldest member of the cell. What do you think of it, Gar? She asked. The boy, who had a gourd strapped to his back and a small tattoo on the left side of his forehead, took a few steps toward the distant forest. I can feel something. Somebody, he said vaguely, his expression as apathetic as it always was. Opting not to press for details, Temari stretched her legs and cracked her neck. Let's get moving again. We can probably get there before sunrise if we hurry, she said. The rest of the cell nodded. A moment later, they took off running again. No matter how hard each of them tried to suppress it, the feeling of awe at just how lofty the trees truly were was impossible to deny the closer they drew. Some of them seemed to reach hundreds of feet into the air. That combined with the very new feeling of soft grass under their feet created a sense of wonder. It was a wholly alien environment, though they had certainly heard about and seen pictures of such things before. Of the group, however, one mind strayed elsewhere. The mind of Gar, the scenery, the new sights and smells, it all meant nothing. It hardly even registered. His mind's eye was purely focused on the barest pinprick of a sensation. The slightest inkling of a presence far, far away. With each step, he drew nearer to what was now becoming a fixation. Eventually, after nearly an hour of running, the cell reached the edge of the trees. And while Temari and Conqueror, his siblings, gawked at their immense height, Gar's eyes punched a hole right through the forest. Beyond the trees, through the weeds, branches, and flowers, lay the epicenter of Gar's instincts. The deeper he dug into his senses, the stronger the grin on his face became. With no prior planning or foresight, he had found something remarkable. Let's go. No more wasting time, Gar said with finality, snapping his brother and sister from their Wonderondruk trances. Immediately nodding, Timu and Conquer readied themselves alongside Baka. A beat later, the cell took off into the branches above. Unbeknownst to those sleeping within its walls, a menace was approaching Konoha. Nar suppressed to Yan as he and the rest of his cell strolled into the building they had been instructed to report to for the beginning of the Chunin exam. It was hardly 7 o'clock in the morning, and while he had managed to rest for a bit over 8 hours the previous night, he still found himself feeling sluggish. Man, it's a full house in here. I figured it'd be a pretty small crowd. Guess not, he thought to himself with a low whistle. The initial hall of the building was quite spacious with high ceilings and a fair bit of room in every direction, but a good portion of that space was being used up by a wide assortment of genin. There were representatives from nearly every elemental nation from Suna to Kusa. Not one nationality was absent. I sort of feel like a brat for having complained about our prep so much. We didn't even have to travel for this, Satsuki commented, prompting a nod of agreement from Shikimaru, who stood to her left. Most of them looked pretty exhausted. Some of them probably got here early this morning. Well, earlier this morning, he said. The written exam was set to begin at 7:20, which gave the group a fair few minutes to scope out their soon-to-be competition. As they all went about their silent observations, Naruto noticed something. Nudging Satsuki, who was now standing between himself and Shikamaru, he pointed out the painfully obvious. You're popular, he said with a snicker. The Uchiha girl folded her arms across her chest and kept her expression as uninviting as possible. Indeed, nearly every boy in the room, and even a few girls had taken at least one long look at Satsuki. I guess every country is full of creeps, she grumbled, obviously uncomfortable with the unwanted attention. Shikamaru smirked and slid his hands into his pockets. These mouth breathers would kill to see what we've seen, he said, giving Naruto a sly look as he spoke. The blonde laughed out loud. You mean the hairpin incident, right? He asked with a smirk. Satsuki's face immediately flushed bright red with embarrassment and anger. We all agreed to forget that ever happened. She hissed. The incident had been an embarrassing one for all involved, but namely for the abrasive Uchiha. Both boys fought to suppress their laughter, earning them each a stomp on their toes. One more word, and I castrate you both on the spot. Satsuki threatened menacingly, knowing better than to test her. Naruto and Shikamaru calmed themselves. What's the general feeling you two are getting from these guys? The blonde asked, changing the subject on a dime. Shikamaru surprisingly spoke first. Most of them seem a little rattled. I think we'll be fine, he said with a fair degree of confidence. Satsuki blew a strand of hair out of her face. I think I agree, but quite a few of them look older than we are, so who knows, she pointed out. Nar considered both perspectives for a moment as they both held merit. My gut tells me that most of them aren't even going to matter. He said honestly. Shikamaru then stopped walking, prompting the rest of Team 7 to do the same. What's up? The blonde inquired. Satsuki silently grabbed his chin with her thumb and index fingers and turned his head from the Nar to what was directly in front of them. Standing static roughly 15 feet ahead of them was another group of genin. 2 boys and 1 girl. They appeared to be roughly their same age with room for slight variation from member to member. Their forehead protectors bore the insignia of Suna. All 3 of them had their eyes fixed on Team 7. Got something to say? Nar asked from across the small space between the 2 groups. The tallest member of the opposite group, a blonde girl with her hair done up in 4 pigtails, glanced at the boy to her right, who had red hair and an apathetic expression on his face. Is it him? She asked vaguely. The redhead gave a nearly imperceptible nod and took a few steps forward. Sensing that he was now the center of attention, Nar moved to meet him. A moment later, the 2 boys were practically toe-to-toe. They were identical in height, and their builds were largely similar. So, I was right after all, the Suna boy said ominously. His voice was coarse and hollow, much like the sand from which he hailed. Nar raised an eyebrow. About what exactly? He pressed. The specter of a smile formed on the redhead's face, though it hardly reached his eyes. You, he replied, for reasons the Jingari couldn't pin down. A shiver ran down his spine. Whoever he was effectively staring down at present held a predatory aura. One that made Nar deeply nervous. We should get a move on, Gar. We're on a schedule, the blonde girl said after clearing her throat to break up the confrontation. The Suna boy, apparently named Gar, promptly pushed past Naruto without another word. The other two Suna genin then followed after him. Before they could fully leave Team 7 in their wake, however, the girl halted right in front of Shikamaru. Standing up straight to accentuate her height, she looked the Nar straight in the eyes. "Name's Temari," she said from well within the lazy gen's personal space. Reacting in characteristic fashion, Shikamaru exhaled through his nose and remained vacant. "That's nice," he said blankly. The girl tilted her head to one side and kept her unnerving eye contact with him. "Not going to tell me your name? That's a little rude," she asked. Shikamaru shrugged his shoulders and met her silent challenge head-on. "I'm not really sure why I have to tell you anything about me, to be honest," he shot back calmly. Tamari's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but she contained any reaction that may have been brewing quickly. "Because it's common courtesy," she reasoned, seeming to sense that he would be heckled until he cracked. The Nar sighed. "It's Shikamaru happy now," he said tiredly. The Suna girl grinned triumphantly and stepped around him, all while maintaining the same uncomfortably close distance. "I'll find you later on," she said, promptly jogging after her own team. Once the words had left her mouth, once she and the rest of the Sanjin were gone, Naruto showed a questioning look. "What was that about?" he asked. Satsuki shook her head and chuckled to herself, grabbing both boys by the sleeve and tugging them along in the direction the Suna genin had gone. "Shikamaru's popular too, I guess," she said humorously, to which the Nar muttered something unintelligible about women and their troublesome nature. Nar then frowned as he and Shikamaru were led along by their teammate. "Where are we going? We already passed the stairs," he asked. Kakashi had informed the group the previous night that the written exam would take place on the second level of the testing building, and the time to report was nearing. "No, we haven't," the Uchiha girl said, not bothering to elaborate further. A few moments later, she quit dragging them. They had stopped in front of what appeared to be a janitor's closet of some kind. Before either Naruto or Shikamaru could ask questions, Satsuki stepped behind them and shoved them both forward. Though both expected to run face first into the wooden surface of the door, they passed right through it. Once they had regained their bearings, they found that they were kneeling at the bottom of a short staircase leading to an upper floor. A beat later, Satsuki walked in between them and up a few steps. They threw in a filter to weed out the unqualified genin. "The staircase is hidden by a pretty weak genjutsu," she explained upon seeing the dumbfounded looks on her teammates' faces. Nar, who was still mildly bewildered, rose to his feet and ascended a step. "How did you know?" he asked as Shikamaru also worked his way to his feet and up a step. The raven-haired girl's eyes flashed red. "These come in handy sometimes," she said proudly, her sharing in a light with amusement at Naruto's begrudging admiration. The group then collectively conquered the remaining steps in the stairway, reaching the next floor inside of a minute. When they did, they found several other teams of Jenna awaiting them. So they saw through it too, the blonde thought to himself. Among the present were a number of familiar faces from the academy, which was both comforting and irritating for differing reasons. Ino Yamanako, Shoji Akamaiki, Shino Arame, Hinata Hyuga, Ka Inazuka, Sakura Haruno, and another three that Naruto did not recognize were all milling about the upper floor, which was essentially just a hallway. "If there's a combat phase to this exam like Sensei said there was, we might be screwed." Shikamaru, who had remained silent since their ascension of the stairs, said bleakly. Nar frowned and beckoned for his teammate to elaborate further. The Naru pointed in the direction of the Konohan that Nar had been unable to identify. "Those three graduated a year before us. I don't know much about the guy with the bull cut or the girl, but I do know that the one with the long hair is Nehaya," he said. Satsuki gave him a skeptical look. "I get that he has a scary last name, but we had Hinata in our class and she wasn't much to write home about," she said. Shikamaru shook his head. "Maybe I'm just reading too much into rumors, but everything I've heard about him suggests that he's the favorite from our village to get promoted," he said. Before the cell could discuss the topic any further, a door on the far end of the hall swung. Soon after, a tall, burly man stepped out into the hall. He wore a dark trench coat, a bandana, and black gloves. In every possible way, he was imposing to look at. "All of you may now enter the testing room. You are not permitted to sit by your teammates, so use your social skills," he said, a surprising undercurrent of mocking humor in his gruff voice. Nar looked to both his teammates who both nodded. The amalgamation of genin then all began to siphon through the open door. With surprising calm, the Chunin exams had begun. Satsuki drummed her fingers on the bench she was seated behind absently. The exam had yet to begin despite all of the genin having been accounted for nearly 5 minutes ago. She was situated near the back of the room, seated between Ino Yamanaka and the girl named Temari who had so unsettled Shikamaru. The Uchiha girl had not chosen her seat because she particularly liked either girl, especially in Ino's case, but it was better than risking the advances of the male genin. I wish I was hideous sometimes, she thought to herself. Choosing to think of things other than male perversion, Satsuki scanned the room for her teammates, whom she had not bothered to keep track of since their entrance into the testing room. It took her little time to find Shikamaru, who appeared to be on the verge of falling asleep 2 rows ahead of her and 2 seats to her left. I'll kill him myself if he dozes off with a butter knife. She sighed within her own mind. No serious part of her believed he would sabotage them so unceremoniously, but the sentiment held true regardless. Satsuki's eyes then drifted across the room once more, this time in search of Naruto. It took longer to find him, but she eventually located him right at the front of the room. He was seated next to Hinata Hyuga. The pair appeared to be having a conversation with Naruto looking rather serious by his standards. He was clearly invested in succeeding and his expressions backed it up. Despite his clear focus on the task at hand, he was polite and calm. Hinata, on the other hand, looked something close to stoic. It had been no secret to anybody with functioning eyes that the Hogger had been lovesick over the blonde for years by this point, but Naruto himself had never caught on. You've got a rich, nice, cute girl loving on you, and you're too dense to see it. Sucker. Satsuki projected to Naruto silently. At the thought and at the sight of Naruto being completely oblivious to the endless signals Hinata was sending his way, Satsuki found herself feeling an unexpected emotion. Relief. For reasons that she herself could not discern, the Uchiha girl took comfort in Naruto's density. Left to himself, he would always be a vacant lot, ready for residents to be taken up. With her eyes still firmly fixed on her teammate and Hinata, Satsuki observed them carefully. May as well give up, Hinata. He's not going to be receptive. You don't even know him anyway. She silently pressed. Nar then laughed at something the meek Hyuga had said. Satsuki's lips twitched downward, teasing a frown. Since when can she joke? She thought to herself. Before Satsuki could push herself any further toward outright displeasure, the large man who had directed them into the room cleared his throat loudly, snapping the entire room to attention. Once all idle chatter in the room had completely ceased, the man positioned himself at the front of the room. As I'm sure you're all aware, you are about to begin this year's Chunin exams. For some of you, this may be your first attempt. Others of you are veterans, for better or worse. He began, his voice commanding and gripping. The man then slammed his fist into the chalkboard behind him, causing the entire room to collectively flinch. Satsuki glanced over to Shikamaru, who now appeared wide awake. As for introductions, my name is Ibiki Morino. I lead Konoha's interrogation and torture unit. I will be your proctor for this exam. You will have 1 hour to complete 10 questions. Any and all cheating is prohibited. If you're caught, your entire team will be disqualified. Are we clear on that? He asked. It was less a question than a challenge. Daring any overconfident well to step up to be made an example of. He's a pro, that's for sure. Satsuki thought to herself. Ibiki Morino was nothing if not intimidating, even to her. From his broad and bulky stature to his job description, he was the definition of a hard man. Not to be crossed. Further consideration of Ibiki's short speech revealed another point of interest beyond the man himself. The wording of his final comments on cheating. There was no jargon on the immorality of the practice, nor an attempt to directly discourage it. Simply a warning about what would happen should one be caught in the act. As Satsuki considered the potential implication behind Ibiki's speech, the tests were passed out down the bench rows. Once she had received her copy of the questions, the Uchiha girl looked them over. It was a single page, double-sided. It was fairly standard looking, but 2 things stood out immediately upon review. Did we miss a few subjects? Satsuki pondered, now quite concerned. The content of the questions seemed fairly tame at a glance, but a full read-through of any one of them revealed a level of complexity and depth that was far beyond what they had prepared for. Upon further inspection, there also appeared to be only 9 of the 10 promised questions present on both sides of the sheet put together. It's got to be intentional. They'd never let that kind of blunder slide for an exam like this. Satsuki decided. Slowly but surely, the entire room was saturated with the testing sheets. The stage was set. Nodding approvingly, Ibiki pulled a stopwatch out of his pocket. You may now begin, he announced. With this order, the room was quickly filled with the sound of pencils against paper. It appeared that Satsuki's, and by extension, her entire team's lack of preparedness was not a universal issue. Taking one last look over the questions, Satsuki couldn't help but chuckle to herself. Yep, I don't know any of this, she concluded, opting to take a few moments to clear her head and think. The Uchiha girl began to observe her surroundings. Before she could even form a thought in her mind, a loud voice rang out. Morishita Takata, turn over your test, gather your team, and leave the room. You have been disqualified, came the authoritative voice of Ibuki. A cry of protest rang out from just behind Satsuki, prompting her to glance back over her shoulder. It was a boy appearing a year or two younger than herself. His forehead protector was marked with the symbol of Iwagakure. Try as he might to argue, he was shut down time and again. Eventually, he dropped his eyes to the floor, picked up his things, and left with his team in tow. Satsuki felt her nerves increase just a tad. Less than 3 minutes into the test, and somebody had already been caught. There would be no mercy. That much was clear. Within the following 10 minutes, 7 more teams were eliminated. 21 people in total in that time. Despite the unnerving prospect of Shikamaru or Nar making a blunder, Satsuki came to one single conclusion. The entire point of the test was to cheat. As counterintuitive as it felt, in her time simply observing, the raven-haired girl had more than a dozen being dishonest in a variety of ways. Most unusually, there was an eye appearing to be made of sand hovering silently up near the ceiling. It was a test of one's ability to effectively gather information in a constrained environment. I guess it's fair game then, Satsuki thought to herself, quietly allowing her sharing to manifest. Searching the room discreetly, she quickly found who she was looking for. Sakura Haruno had never been high up on Satsuki's personal list of classmates she liked and disliked for a variety of reasons, but the one thing she could find within herself to respect about the girl was her academic ability. If anybody would have semi-accurate answers to questions of this difficulty level, it would be her. Shifting in her seat ever so slightly to get a better look at Sakura's hands, Satsuki invoked one of the many convenient abilities her eyes afforded her. That being the power to perfectly mimic both jutsu and movement at a glance. Within seconds, the Uchiha girl's hand was moving in sync with Sakura's. It appeared that she was on the third question, leaving her answers for the first 2 unknown to Satsuki. I'm going to have to rewrite all of these so they don't catch that our handwriting is identical. Satsuki lamented as she wrote, minute by minute, word by word, the raven-haired genin plagiarized her former classmate. Within 20-odd minutes, she had 7 of the 9 available questions answered. Closing her eyes and deactivating her dojutsu, Satsuki took a deep breath in and then promptly released it. I'll just guess on the first 2, she thought to herself. Before beginning the tedious task of finalizing her answers and rewriting them in her own penmanship, she took a moment to check up on her teammates. Both were writing, which was good, but Naruto's movements looked odd as though they didn't fit his body or natural way of motion. Satsuki then narrowed her eyes in Shikamaru's direction. Is he? She wondered, turning her attention to the aisles between rows. Though it required her to squint, she soon discovered a strange shadow that was somehow twisting around feet and corners. It began at Shikamaru and appeared to reach in Naruto's direction. Satsuki smirked. Nice, Shikamaru. Real nice. She commended the Nar boy silently. She now felt rather optimistic. Even if the answers she'd stolen from Sakura were far from perfect, she strongly suspected that the answers themselves didn't matter. With her new calmness, Satsuki briskly finished her test as best she could. 15 minutes left, if I had to guess. Naruto and Shikamaru look about done, too, she noted mentally. All there was left to do was wait. They had succeeded, at least in theory, in gathering information without being caught. Though, whether or not Shikamaru had drawn his answers from elsewhere at all was an open question. Minute by minute, the remaining time ticked away with a few more teams being eliminated for their lack of subtlety and cheating. Eventually, once the final minute had expired, Ibuki pounded his fist on the chalkboard once again. Shikamaru let out a sigh of relief as the sound of Ibuki's fist against the chalkboard reverberated through the room. They had all made it. The true purpose of the test had been obvious to anybody with any intuition whatsoever 5 minutes into the ordeal, but that knowledge had made it no less stressful. His heart had been racing at 1,000 miles per hour throughout most of his possession of Naruto's shadow. Half the original count got kicked out. They thinned the numbers big time. The shadow user thought to himself as he looked around the room in the tense silence. Ibuki's voice then cut through the void. I would like to congratulate you all. Each and every one of you, honest or not, has grasped the concept of this exam to gather intel without compromising your discretion. As I'm sure you've all noticed, however, there are only 9 questions on that sheet in front of you, the proctor said, earning a unified nod from the remaining genin. Ibuki responded to the affirmation by grabbing a piece of chalk and writing the number 10 on the board. I will be personally administering the 10th question, and I assure you, this one cannot be cheated or swindled, he said. A few of the genin audibly swallowed. Shikamaru himself simply kept his eyes trained on the man. Whatever he was about to ask was bound to be rather abstract. Be warned, if you fail to answer this question correctly, you will automatically fail the exam and be ineligible to retake it in the future, Ibiki said in a low, threatening tone. The entire room seemed to tense at his words. Like the shark he clearly was, Ibiki easily smelled the fear he had incurred. With that in mind, I will offer you an alternative. Forfeit now, and you will be allowed to retake the exam next year, he continued, pausing to gauge the reactions of the genin before him. Once the silence had gone on for just a touch too long, he spoke once again. Now, would any of you like to take me up on that offer? He asked. Though there were initially no takers, a meek voice in the back piped up after a time. I think I'm going to bow out, said a scruffy-looking boy who appeared to be from Kumogak. Two more genin who one could assume were his teammates immediately protested but were quickly silenced by Ibiki. If that is your choice, take your things and leave. Anybody else who feels too overwhelmed, I encourage you to follow suit, the proctor said professionally. Shikamaru eyed both of his teammates. Neither had moved, and neither seemed poised to do so. As such, it was on him to make the call. He cared little about the promotion the exam could result in, but at the same time, he had no room to be selfish. It would be troublesome, but he would see it through with them to the end. After several teams had filed out of the room, Ibiki eyed those that remained in the room, a faint hint of interest gleaming in his dark eyes. So, I take it the rest of you would like to hear the 10th question, he inquired. Though he received no verbal answer, the genin's continued presence in the room was an answer in and of itself. Shikamaru braced himself. Then, surprisingly, Ibiki Morino, head of the interrogation and torture unit, smiled warmly. You all pass, he said simply. Shikamaru, much like every other person in the room, looked on in bewildered confusion. As he was wont to do, Naruto's voice then rang through with the question on the mind of his fellow genin. What about the 10th question? He asked quizzically. Ibiki turned to face the blonde directly and shrugged his broad shoulders. That was the 10th question. Whether or not you were willing to risk your futures to advance. You all answered admirably. He said matter-of-factly. Shikamaru in a rare occurrence entirely agreed with what Naruto said next. That's really stupid. The Jingurise said bluntly. Ibiki, much to the surprise of everybody else in the room, laughed out loud at the boy's insolence. It can certainly feel that way the first time through. I agree. He said humorously. He then glanced down at his watch and frowned, muttering something under his breath that Shikamaru could not hear. Seemingly on cue, however, somebody came crashing through one of the windows on the left side of the room. Why can't any part of this be normal? Shikamaru complained silently. Upon further inspection, the person who had sent shattered glass in every direction was a woman who appeared to be in her late 20s. She had purple hair tied up in a high ponytail and wore a light brown coat over a form-fitting fishnet shirt. You're late, Enko, Ibiki said gruffly as the woman dusted herself off, earning him a punch on the shoulder in return. I just wanted to give you more time with them. We both know you love kids, she joked. She then turned her attention to the genin, who were all staring at her with wide eyes. Enko, as she had been called by Ibiki, folded her arms across her chest. Looks like around 30 or so. Genin, you're getting soft, Ibiki, she commented. When the interrogator did not respond, Enko cleared her throat. All right, listen up, punks. I'm Enko Midarashi. I'll be your proctor for the second phase of your exam, she announced. Shikamaru fought the urge to groan. This Enko woman seemed like a royal pain of the highest order. Loud, brash, and unconcerned with professionalism. A single sentence out of her mouth had been telling. You're to report to the Forest of Death at 7 sharp tomorrow morning. Any later, and the gate's close. I'll explain the rest when we aren't cooped up in a stuffy classroom. Enko said, vanishing into a puff of smoke a moment later, leaving the room dumbstruck and confused. Ibiki scratched the back of his head and sighed. If you aren't from around here, the forest she's referring to is on the eastern border of the village. She isn't very punctual or detail-oriented. I'm afraid, he said awkwardly. He then checked his watch again. You're all free to go. As she said, 7 sharp is your deadline for arrival tomorrow morning. I wish you luck, he said promptly, walking out of the classroom once he had finished speaking. The moment he was gone, the room erupted into chaos with genin scrambling to find their teammates and loudly talking over one another. And now it's loud. This sucks, Shikamaru muttered to himself. Thankfully, he did not need to search to find his teammates, as one of them found him first and tapped him on the shoulder. Well, this was interesting, Satsuki, who was standing behind him, said. The Naru rose to his feet and stretched. Once he was limbered up, he glanced at the Uchiha girl. That's one way to put it. I'd use the word troublesome personally, he replied, beckoning to his Weward teammate, Nar, who was on the other side of the room. The blonde quickly spotted him and jogged over. That guy seemed pretty neat, he said. Upon reaching the rest of his team, Satsuki rolled her eyes and elbowed him in the ribs as she always did. You caught him in a good mood, mouth thing off to a jonin is going to get you hurt someday, she said in a scolding tone. The blonde glared at her momentarily, but soon turned his gaze to Shikamaru. All of your answers were weird and wrong. Why? He asked skeptically in reference to the Naru's assistance during the test. Shikamaru shrugged his shoulders. I thought it was pretty obvious that the point of the test was just not to get caught cheating. And we didn't get caught. The details didn't really matter, he said simply. Nar frowned. What if somebody just wrote down a bunch of wrong answers without figuring that out? He asked. Shikamaru scratched his cheek absently. Those were the people who gave up and left when they had the chance, he replied. It was a guess and nothing more, but it sounded reasonable enough out loud. Seeming to accept this logic, the blonde gestured toward the door. Wanna to get a second breakfast? He asked. Satsuki's immediate response was to shake her head, but her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. I could go for some food, she admitted, looking mildly embarrassed. Finding that he had nothing else planned for the day and nothing better to do, Shikamaru nodded. Show us that ramen place you keep preaching about, he said. Nar grinned and began hauling them both out of the room. As he was pulled toward the door, Shikamaru swept his eyes around the room to see who still remained upon their exit. His eyes froze halfway through his second look around. He had locked eyes with Gar, who was watching them leave with silent menace. So guys, what do you think about this Naruto story? Tell me your opinion in the comments. And if you want more Naruto what if stories, make sure to subscribe.